Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I couldn't stop thinking about how quiet that place looked when I first pulled into the gravel driveway. It wasn't the kind of quiet that made me feel relaxed. It was the kind that weighed on me, like the air got denser the moment I stepped out of my car. The building sat at the end of a narrow road about 40 kilometers outside the city. I chose it for peace and isolation. I had a big project that needed my full attention, and I wanted to escape my usual surroundings. The inn was small, with worn wood panels on the exterior and an old sign that creaked every time the wind picked up. It seemed cozy enough at first glance. I expected calm nights and a lot of time to work, but I got something else entirely. I remember pulling my suitcase inside and smelling something like damp wood in the lobby. The place had a rustic feel. The walls were lined with old photos of the inn in different stages of its history. Some pictures showed fresh paint, others had scaffolding in the background, and one featured a different owner standing in front of a newly built wing. The current owner, a tall, lean man with tired eyes, greeted me at the desk. He asked for my details, gave me a room key, and mentioned that the building went through many renovations and multiple owners. He laughed it off like it was just a bit of trivia, but his eyes kept shifting toward the hallway. I got the sense he wanted to leave something out. The hallway smelled musty, like dusty fabric and floor polish. My room was the second door on the left. The door squeaked loudly when I opened it. The space was plain: a single bed, a small table, a chair, and a narrow closet. The walls had chipped paint and the floor creaked when I walked across to set my bag down. Everything felt old, but serviceable. The bathroom was cramped, with a simple sink, a tiny shower stall, and a toilet that looked like it had seen better days. Still, it was enough for my needs. I sat on the edge of the bed, tested the mattress, and felt the springs push back. It wasn't comfortable, but I figured it would be fine for a few nights. I unpacked my laptop and some notebooks. I planned to start working right away. The Wi-Fi signal was weak, so I plugged in an Ethernet cable I'd brought along. I got settled on the old wooden chair near the desk. My mind was on my project, the data I had to analyze, the charts I had to prepare. I tried not to think about the stale odor coming from the hallway or the faint sound of someone moving around in the distance. After an hour or so, my neck began to stiffen, so I decided to stretch my legs and check out the rest of the inn. I walked down the corridor and noticed the floorboards shifting beneath me. They made a deep groan each time I took a step. The walls had a few old landscape paintings in cheap frames. One of them leaned slightly to the right, but I decided not to touch it. I found the kitchen at the far end, past the lobby, where a young woman stood behind the counter. She was dressed in a simple polo shirt and jeans. She smiled quickly, then asked if I needed anything. I asked about dinner options, and she said the inn usually served a basic meal around 7. When I asked about the place's history, she looked away, almost like she was trying to avoid the topic. I brushed it off and told her I would be around later. Around dinner time, I came back to the dining area, which had 3 small wooden tables. There were a couple of other guests sitting and eating, but nobody was in the mood to talk. They kept their heads down, focused on their plates. The meal was rice, beans, and some roasted chicken. It tasted fine, though the room felt heavier than before. I heard the wind picking up outside and the old sign swinging back and forth with a faint clanging. After I finished eating, I carried my plate to a small bin near the sink. As I walked back to my room, I felt a drop in the temperature. My arms prickled with goosebumps. I told myself it was just the night chill. The corridors were dimly lit, and I could barely see the doors in front of me. Back in my room, I locked the door and got ready for bed. The lock clicked firmly, and I tugged the doorknob a few times to be sure. Then I heard a noise outside, like footsteps on the wood. I stayed quiet, listening. The steps seemed to stop near my door, then moved away. I hurried over and looked through the peephole. Nobody was there. My heart pounded in my chest. I thought maybe another guest had gone past, or maybe it was the owner. I tried to shrug it off. I set my alarm on my phone and climbed into bed. The springs squeaked under my weight. That night I woke to the sound of water running. It was coming from the bathroom. I pushed myself up, rubbed my eyes, and switched on the bedside lamp. I could hear the faucet gushing. I got out of bed, crossed the cold floor, and stepped into the bathroom. The sink tap was fully turned on. Water spilled around the drain, splashing the sides of the sink. I stood there trying to remember if I left it on. I was sure I hadn't used the sink since brushing my teeth before bed. I turned it off. My pulse was racing and my stomach felt tight. I told myself maybe I was tired and forgot. I went back to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. The next morning I walked down to the kitchen looking for coffee. The young woman from the night before was there again. She asked if I slept well. I told her about the faucet. She looked uneasy and told me she's seen the faucet problem before. Then she mentioned something else. Cups and glasses had a habit of turning up broken for no reason. She had once closed the kitchen for the night with everything in its place, only to find shards of glass all over the counters the next morning. I asked if the owner knew about it. She nodded, but her expression told me he didn't like to discuss it. I thanked her for the coffee and sat down at a table, trying to steady my nerves. I spent most of that day in my room, working. The hours drifted by with me typing, reading, and making calls when the connection allowed. Occasionally I heard noises in the corridor, like someone walking slowly. Once I opened the door to see if anyone was there. No one. The hallway seemed too still, as if even the air wasn't moving. Around lunchtime I decided to step out for a break. I went down to the lobby and saw a figure outside in the garden. He was an older man with a floppy hat and overalls. He was hunched over, fiddling with the plants. I watched him for a bit. I figured he was the gardener, maybe just a part-time worker who came by to keep the grounds in shape. When I returned around dinner, I mentioned the gardener to the young woman at the desk. She looked confused and told me they didn't have an older gardener. She said they had a local guy who mowed the grass every other week, but he was in his 30s. She had never seen an old man in overalls around the property. A tingle ran down my spine. I wondered if maybe a neighbor came by to help out, or if she just didn't know him. But the tension in her voice made me think otherwise. She said a few guests had claimed to see a man in the garden, always dressed the same, always in that old hat. Nobody had ever spoken to him. He vanished when people tried to get closer. That night I made sure to lock my door twice. I even wedged a small chair against it. I tried to sleep, but I heard creaking floorboards again. I sat up listening, my mouth dry. The sound stopped right outside my room, then paused. I waited, my muscles tense. After a minute or two, it faded away. I got out of bed, moved the chair aside, and checked the hallway. It was empty. I pushed the chair back and tried to settle down again. Maybe half an hour later, I heard a clicking sound at the door. I froze. I stared at the doorknob, holding my breath. It jiggled gently, then stopped. My skin felt clammy. A second later, I heard the lock slide open, like someone turned a key from the outside. The door swung inward an inch, then stayed there, half open. I didn't see anyone. My hands were shaking. I leaped out of bed, grabbed the knob, and yanked the door shut. I locked it again and pressed my ear to the wood. Nothing. It was silent except for my own breathing. In the morning, I went straight to the owner. I waited by the front desk until he showed up. When he arrived, I told him what happened with the door. I asked if the lock was broken. He shrugged, looking away. He mumbled something about the locks being old, but his voice was tight. I pressed him for details, but he just said they'd had trouble with the doors before. Then he looked at me like he regretted saying it. He said if I wanted a refund, he could arrange something, but I still needed the place to finish my work. So I stayed. Over the next few days, strange things kept happening. At one point, I heard shattering glass from the kitchen. I rushed over and saw broken mugs on the floor, fresh shards scattered everywhere. The young woman just stood there, her face pale. Nobody else was around. She said she had placed those mugs on the shelf an hour ago. Another night, I stepped outside to get some air. I saw the old man with the floppy hat at the edge of the garden. He was kneeling by a flower bed. I called out to him, but he didn't move. I walked closer, and he seemed to vanish behind a tall hedge. When I circled around to the other side, I found nothing but a patch of grass. My hands were shaking, and the cold night air stung my skin. I tried to focus on my project. I kept my door locked, sometimes pushing the desk against it when I worked late. I made sure every window was secured, but I still heard footsteps in the halls at odd hours. Sometimes I smelled something foul, like stagnant water or decaying plants, seeping in from the garden. The worst were the nights when the door unlocked on its own. It happened twice more. Each time I heard a faint clicking noise, then felt a rush of cold air as the door cracked open. I didn't see anyone in the hall when I flung it wide, and the corridor light always flickered, adding to my sense of panic. Once I saw the owner pacing in the lobby around midnight. I went to him and asked if he'd experienced anything lately. He just looked at me with tired eyes and said he avoided the corridors at night. He said he couldn't explain the things that happened. His voice was flat, like he'd given up trying to rationalize it. Then he apologized if I felt uncomfortable, and he walked off. I didn't have the energy to push the conversation. I felt drained, like the weird atmosphere was sapping my strength. On my final night, I got up around 3 a.m. to use the bathroom. The faucet was on again, water running at full blast. I switched it off, cursing under my breath. My heart pounded as I crawled back into bed. My eyelids felt heavy, but my mind kept spinning. I was worried about my project. I was worried about the door unlocking again. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening for any sign of movement. Around dawn, I finally drifted off. When I woke up, I started packing my bags. I'd had enough. I didn't care that my work wasn't fully done. I couldn't take the tension anymore. As I carried my things to the car, I glanced at the garden. It looked empty, just some shrubs and a few scattered tools. There was no sign of the old man. The wind was still. The inn felt hushed, like it was holding its breath. I could sense eyes on my back, even though I didn't see anyone watching me. I checked out at the front desk. The owner avoided eye contact and thanked me for my stay. I mumbled a quick thanks and walked out. I got in my car, started the engine, and felt a wave of relief. My chest loosened up the moment I turned onto the main road. The drive back to the city was quiet. I tried to focus on the sound of my tires on the asphalt. I looked in the rearview mirror once or twice, half expecting to see that old gardener standing in the middle of the road. But there was nothing behind me except empty highway. I never figured out what was going on at that inn. I never got a straight answer from the owner or the staff. All I know is that the place felt wrong. Every time I heard those footsteps, every time the faucets turned on or the doors unlocked by themselves, I felt a chill sink into my bones. It still rattles me to think about it. I'm not sure who or what was lurking in those corridors at night, but I'm certain I wasn't alone there, and I'm glad I got out. I still remember the first time I saw that doll. It was on top of a box in the storage room at my mom's place, and it made me feel uneasy right away. The light coming from the single overhead bulb was weak, and the doll's purple hair seemed to shimmer in that half-dark corner. My sister had left a bunch of boxes there when she moved to a different city for her new job. I figured I'd just open them up, see what was inside, and organize everything. But the moment I picked up that doll, I felt my stomach tighten. It looked like a punk throwback from the 90s, complete with little chains around its arms, a black vinyl outfit, and heavy makeup. There was something off about it. I don't know if it was the weird grin on its painted lips or the fact that the eyes were a dull gray, but it gave me a tight feeling in my chest. I called my sister to ask about it. She sounded distracted, like she barely remembered this doll. She said it was a gift from someone she used to hang out with, a friend who turned hostile after they had a fallout. She didn't say much else, just that the person was strange, and that she hadn't wanted the doll in her new apartment. She asked me to do whatever I wanted with it. I put the phone down and felt a jolt of dread. I wasn't sure why. Dolls never really bothered me before, but I felt a little shaky as I set it on a shelf in the storage room. I didn't have time to deal with it right then, so I left it there and locked the door behind me. That night I woke up at around 3 in the morning. I'm a light sleeper, and I sometimes get up just to drink water or check the house. But I heard a sound that made my heart race. It was scratching like nails scraping wood. I thought maybe it was the dog messing around. But then I realized the dog usually sleeps in the living room, and I hadn't heard him get up. I sat up in bed and listened carefully. It was definitely coming from the direction of the storage room. I tried to convince myself it was just something outside or some branch hitting the wall, but the dog started whimpering in the hallway. I got up, opened my bedroom door, and saw him standing there, ears back, staring down the corridor. He wouldn't budge. He looked scared. I walked toward the storage room. The hallway light was on, but I kept checking over my shoulder to see if the dog would follow. He stayed far behind, like he refused to get any closer. The scratching sound stopped the moment I laid my hand on the doorknob. I unlocked the door and flipped the switch inside. The bare bulb lit the small space. Nothing was out of place at first glance. I stepped in and scanned every corner. The boxes were in the same spot. The shelves were the same. My heart was pounding. Then I saw the doll. It was sitting on the shelf exactly where I left it. I stared at it for a few seconds, waiting for some kind of movement. It didn't move, of course. It just had that same blank grin. I stepped closer and touched its plastic arms. They were cold and stiff, just normal plastic. I stood there for a minute, listening to my own breathing. There was no more scratching, no more strange noises. I left and locked up again, trying not to think too hard about it. The next morning, I told my mom about the scratching. She looked a bit worried, but said maybe there were mice in the wall or something. Our house is old and weird noises happen sometimes, but I checked for signs of rodents. I didn't see any droppings or chew marks. I didn't say anything else because I didn't want to worry her, but in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about the doll. The dog still refused to go near that side of the hallway. If I tried to call him there, he'd whine and back away. A few days passed and nothing too strange happened. I tried to forget about the doll, focusing on normal chores. My sister called once or twice to talk about unrelated stuff. She said she was doing fine in her new city. Then, about a week after I first found the doll, I went into the storage room with a broom and dustpan. I wanted to sweep the floor and move some boxes. When I turned on the light, I saw weird marks on the wall above the shelf. They looked like soot or ash. I frowned and touched the black marks with my fingers. They felt dry and flaky, like something had burned. I called out to my mom, asked her if she'd lit a candle in there or tried to burn something. She said no. She rarely went into that room anyway. I climbed on a stool to inspect the wall. I couldn't see any real burn marks, just a dusty black residue that rubbed off on my fingertips. It didn't look like smoke damage, more like smudges. Then I glanced down at the doll. It wasn't sitting. It was on the floor against the corner of the wall, face down. The position looked weird, like it had been tossed, but the boxes around it were undisturbed. I remember feeling a chill at the back of my neck. I knew I had left it sitting on the shelf a few days earlier, perfectly upright. There was no sign of anything that could have knocked it down. The shelf wasn't close to the door or any window, and no one else had gone in. My mom swore she never touched the thing. I picked it up carefully and tried to balance it on the shelf again. I could feel my hands shaking. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting to see it close by itself, but it stayed open. I threw my cleaning stuff aside and left the storage room. My heartbeat was loud in my ears. I washed my hands in the bathroom sink, scrubbing off the black residue. My mom gave me a concerned look when I came out, but I just told her I was fine and didn't want to talk about it. I felt uneasy the rest of the day. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, like the walls were charged with tension. The dog stayed glued to my mom most of the time and refused to go near the storage room door. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept tossing and turning, thinking about the doll's face, that heavy eyeliner, the purple hair, those dull eyes. Around midnight, I got out of bed and walked to the living room. I turned on the TV and tried to distract myself with some random show. My eyes felt heavy, but my nerves were on edge. After about half an hour, I heard a door squeak. I muted the TV and listened. It wasn't my bedroom door or the bathroom door. It sounded like the storage room door, but I knew I had locked it. My throat tightened. I stood up and tiptoed to the hallway. The dog was nowhere in sight. I peered around the corner. The door was still shut, but I could have sworn I heard it move. The doorknob looked the same. I forced myself to walk over and check it. Locked. I tried to rationalize. Maybe the wood was just contracting in the cool night air. I went back to the living room and turned the TV volume back up, telling myself to stay calm. The next morning, I decided I wasn't waiting any longer. I called my sister again and asked her if she knew more about the doll. She sounded annoyed with my questions. She said the woman who gave it to her was someone she used to hang out with at rock shows years ago. They had a big argument once, and the woman acted erratic. My sister didn't remember the details, just that it ended badly. I asked her if she thought the doll might have been tampered with or if it had some device inside. She paused and said she didn't know, but the gift felt strange at the time. She said she'd never liked it and kept it boxed up. She apologized for leaving it with me. I hung up, feeling angry and unsettled. I went to my mom and told her I wanted to get rid of the doll. She looked relieved. She said she didn't like the idea of throwing away a gift, but she also admitted she felt uncomfortable with the dog acting so skittish and the weird soot on the wall. I took a deep breath, grabbed a trash bag, and headed back into the storage room. The doll was still on the shelf. This time it was upright. It was turned slightly to face the door, as if it was looking at me. My heart pounded, but I tried to keep my composure. I walked straight to it, put it in the bag, and tied a knot. I felt like I needed to put it somewhere far away from the house. I told my mom I was going to drive to a dump outside the neighborhood and toss it out. She nodded. While I was walking to my car, I felt a strange weight in my arms. The doll in that bag felt heavier than it should have. I ignored it, opened the trunk, and dropped the bag inside. On the drive, I gripped the wheel so tight my fingers hurt. I could hear the rustling of the bag each time I hit a bump, but I tried not to think about it. After about 10 minutes on the road, the rustling seemed louder. I turned up the radio to drown it out. My breath felt shallow and I was sweating even though the air conditioning was on low. Finally, I reached the local dump site. It was just a clearing where people sometimes threw away old junk. I parked, popped the trunk, and grabbed the bag. I walked to a large dumpster and tossed the whole thing inside. It made a hollow thud as it hit the metal bottom. I stood there for a second, heart pounding, half expecting to see the bag move, but it stayed still. I got back in the car and drove home. The entire ride, I kept checking my rearview mirror, as if I expected the doll to somehow appear in the back seat. My chest was tight, and I tried to breathe slowly. By the time I got home, I was exhausted. My mom asked if I'd done it, and I said yes. She looked relieved, gave me a small smile, and said she hoped that would solve everything. I felt the same way. That night, I slept better than I had in a while. No scratching noises, no doors creaking. The dog wandered around the hallway without hesitation. He even sniffed at the storage room door, then trotted back, tail wagging. I double-checked inside the room the next morning, and there was nothing strange. No soot, no weird positions of objects, just the leftover boxes and some dusty shelves. I felt a lightness in my chest, like a burden had lifted. It's been a few days since then, and things have returned to normal. My sister called again, and I told her I had tossed the doll. She didn't object. She actually laughed nervously and said it was probably for the best. I haven't heard any more scratching, and the dog seems fine now. I still feel uneasy when I remember that purple hair and the heavy makeup. I don't know what the deal was, and honestly, I don't want to investigate further. I just hope that thing stays where I left it and doesn't end up back at my door. I don't have any big explanation. I only know what I saw and heard. The scratches, the strange soot, the way the doll kept changing positions. It all felt unnatural. I've thrown out a lot of things in my life, but nothing ever felt like this. I'm just glad it's gone. I told my mom that if we ever find anything like that again, we should get rid of it right away. She agreed. I'm not usually a superstitious person, but I don't need any more proof to believe there's something out there we can't control. Right now, the storage room is back to being a normal storage room. The dog walks by without freaking out. I sleep through the night, and life is calm again. That's all I want. I don't need a reason or a deeper explanation. I'm done with that doll, and I hope it's done with me too. I've never told this story before, but I can't forget a single detail. It happened on a cold winter morning when I was still living on that small ranch in the countryside. I used to get up before dawn, pull on my boots, grab my jacket, and head out for a walk with my dog, Max. It felt normal then. I liked the quiet. I liked seeing the moon hanging over the fields. But that day changed the way I see the early hours forever. I remember the chill in the air. My breath made little clouds in front of my face as we moved along the edge of our property. The sun wasn't up yet, so the sky was that deep blue color that shows up right before dawn. The ground was firm under my boots, and I could smell the damp dirt and last night's dew. Max padded beside me, sniffing the ground, pausing every now and then to look around. He always walked a few steps ahead, ears perked, like he was on a mission. The fields were silent, except for a few distant sounds from birds waking up. We reached an old fence that separated our land from a thick patch of brush and trees. I'd been through there plenty of times. The fence had a few loose boards, so it was easy to slip through and follow a narrow trail. The place always seemed darker than the rest of the property because the trees were thick and the undergrowth closed in on both sides. Max didn't seem to mind. He'd push through the brush and I'd follow behind, ducking under branches. The only light came from my flashlight, but I usually kept it turned off because I knew the path well. That morning, I decided to cut through a shortcut I had only used a couple of times. It was a narrower path that led straight to an open field on the other side of the woods. The air felt colder there. I could hear Max's paws rustling leaves in front of me. There was no wind, so every little crunch or snap was loud. At some point, Max froze. He stopped dead in his tracks and his ears went straight up. I saw his tail stiffen. It made my chest tighten. I slowed down and listened. Nothing. Not a single rustle. My heart started to pound, but I tried to brush it off. I whispered, "What is it, boy?" He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just stood there like he was waiting. I moved forward a bit. My eyes scanned the area, but it was too dark to see much, so I finally switched on my flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, landing on the narrow trail ahead. At first, I saw just branches and leaves, maybe a few patches of tall grass. Then I saw movement to my left behind a low bush. It was a dark shape, something hunched over. I thought it might be a stray dog or maybe a wolf, although wolves were rare around there, but I couldn't get a clear look. Max let out a low whine. He backed up a step and pressed his body closer to my leg. I felt the muscles in my arms tense, and a surge of adrenaline made my heart thump even harder. I took a few slow steps, trying to get a better angle with the flashlight. The shape shifted, and I saw a patch of black fur. It was tangled, thick, and matted in clumps. It looked too big to be a normal dog, but not huge enough to be a bear. I told myself it might be a skinny wolf or a large stray dog that had been living rough. Then it turned. I saw a face, or at least something like a face. There was a snout, and two eyes glinted in the flashlight beam. They reflected a dull, yellowish light. My mouth went dry, and I felt my knees tighten up. Max started to growl, a low rumble that I felt through my leg. The creature stared for a moment, then it stopped moving. It looked like it was trying to figure out if we were a threat. I was too scared to move. I stood there, hand shaking on the flashlight, breath catching in my throat. My head was spinning with questions. Is that a wolf? Did it escape from somewhere? Is it sick? But then, before I could do anything else, it lifted its upper body. It stood up on its hind legs. That wasn't normal. It was a smooth movement too, not wobbly or clumsy. It rose up and balanced there, staring straight at me. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even blink. My skin felt cold. My heart hammered so hard that I felt like my chest would burst. The creature was tall, standing like that. At least as tall as me. Its front limbs hung at its sides, but they looked too long. Its head tilted, like it was trying to see me better. I heard my own pulse in my ears, and I tasted acid in my mouth because I was breathing so fast. My body wanted to run, but I couldn't move yet. I just stared. I don't know how long we stood there. Maybe a few seconds, maybe a minute. I could hear Max's breathing and the shuffle of his paws on the dirt. Then, without warning, the creature turned and stepped into the dense brush to the left. It stayed on two legs, pushing branches aside as it disappeared. It didn't grunt. It didn't make any obvious noise besides the rustle of leaves. But it moved fast, almost like a person who knew the path well. The second it vanished from my view, I gasped for air. I realized I'd been holding my breath. My entire body felt stiff and my forehead was damp with sweat despite the cold. Max started barking, short, urgent barks that echoed through the trees. I snapped out of my daze and gripped his collar. My hands shook so badly that I almost dropped the flashlight. I told myself, "Get out of here, get back to the house." I could still feel that sick, hollow sensation in my stomach. I forced my feet to move. My legs felt heavy, but I picked up the pace. I turned around and practically dragged Max with me. He kept barking, but I yanked gently on his collar to quiet him. I didn't want to attract any more attention from whatever that thing was. My mind kept playing it back. The black fur, the shape of it, the way it stood up. Every time the image flashed in my head, my heart kicked into overdrive again. I tried not to look at the trees. I imagined that creature behind every trunk, watching us, ready to jump out. I felt my chest tighten and my breath quicken, so I forced myself to focus on the path in front of me. It was a longer walk back than I remembered. The forest felt darker. The flashlight beam seemed weaker, like the batteries were dying, but I knew it was just my nerves. Max stopped barking after a while, but he stayed glued to my side, glancing around with his tail low. I tried not to run. I told myself it was safer to move at a steady pace. If I ran, I might trip, or I might panic. But inside, I wanted to sprint as fast as I could. When I finally saw the fence through the trees, I felt a surge of relief. The old boards looked like a welcome sign. I hurried over to the loose plank, pushed it aside, and stepped through. Max followed me without hesitation, tail still tucked. The fields on my side of the fence felt safer. There were fewer trees, and I could see the outline of my house in the distance. The sky had started to lighten, turning a pale gray. Soon the sun would rise and the morning would seem ordinary again. But in that moment, I couldn't shake the fear crawling all over my skin. I walked quickly, keeping my head turned every so often to check behind me. I saw nothing but a few crows lifting off from a distant fence post. The air smelled of wet grass, and I felt a damp chill clinging to my jacket. My body was still trembling. I could hardly keep a steady step. Max stayed silent now, panting softly as he looked around. When we reached the house, I fumbled for my keys. My hands were shaking, and it took me a few tries to fit the key into the lock. I got the door open and stumbled inside. The house was quiet, just like it always was in the morning. I shut the door behind me, locked it, and sank against it. My breathing was fast and shallow, and my skin felt clammy. Max stayed close, looking up at me. His ears were still back. I knelt down, patted his head, and tried to calm myself. My heart felt like it might burst out of my chest. I sat there for a few minutes trying to decide what to do next. Should I call someone? The police? Animal control? But what would I say? I saw some big furry creature that stood on two legs. They'd probably shrug it off or think I was joking. Maybe they'd come out and search, maybe they wouldn't. I couldn't imagine explaining it without sounding crazy. My mouth was dry and my throat felt tight. I realized I was exhausted. I got up, pulled off my boots, and walked into the kitchen. I poured a glass of water, gulped it down, and tried to think straight. My mind kept replaying the moment that thing rose onto two legs. Every time I remembered its eyes reflecting the flashlight, I felt a wave of fear ripple through my stomach. I took another deep breath, leaned against the counter, and tried to calm down. Maybe it was just some strange dog with a deformed back leg. Maybe I imagined how tall it was. But I knew how it looked. I felt how unnatural it seemed. I went to check all the doors and windows, locking them even though it was early morning. I closed the blinds because I couldn't shake the feeling that something might be lurking outside. I wanted to block it all out. Max followed me from room to room, still on edge. After I finished checking, I took him into the living room and sat on the couch, staring at the wall for a while. Eventually, the sun came up. Daylight poured through the cracks in the blinds, and the house felt less threatening. I peeked outside. The fields looked the same as always. The sky was clear, and there was a faint glow on the horizon. Normally, I loved that morning light, but that day, it just felt off. I kept expecting to see a dark figure moving through the tall grass. I sat there for hours, replaying the encounter in my head. Part of me wanted to head back out there and look for tracks just to see if I was going crazy, but the rest of me wanted to forget it ever happened. I couldn't imagine what I'd do if I found prints that confirmed what I saw. I was torn between my usual curiosity about the land and a new fear that I might run into that thing again. Eventually, I tried to go about my day. I fed Max, checked on a few things around the ranch, and did some routine chores. But my mind was not in it. Every little noise made me jump. If I heard the rustle of leaves outside, I went stiff. Max seemed uneasy too. He followed me closely and didn't wander like he normally did. His ears were always half-cocked, like he was waiting for something else to happen. I considered talking to a neighbor. Part of me wanted to see if anyone else had come across anything strange in the early morning hours, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. It felt like a secret I wasn't ready to share. I also didn't want them looking at me like I was out of my mind. Sometimes folks around here love to spread stories about weird encounters, but they usually chalk them up to tall tales or local legends. I didn't want to be that guy who claimed he saw a monster in the woods. Days went by and life settled back into a routine. I still took Max for walks, but not through the same path. I stuck to the open areas and made sure we went later after the sun was up. I pretended everything was normal, but I'd catch myself tensing up at any movement in the distance. If I heard a strange howl or a barking dog far away, I'd freeze. I never saw that creature again. Sometimes I look at the dark line of trees along the horizon and wonder if it's in there watching, or maybe it moved on. I don't go into the deep parts of the brush alone anymore, especially not at dawn, and I still haven't mentioned it to anyone around here. I don't even know what I'd call it. It's been a while since that morning, and I can still picture every detail in my mind. The shape of the creature's fur, the way it stood on its hind legs, the intense look in its eyes. It didn't act like a normal animal. It felt off, like it had some human-like awareness or something close to it. But I keep those thoughts to myself. I handle it the best way I can, by not thinking too hard about what it might have been. That's the whole story. I haven't gone back to that spot in the woods. I haven't told any neighbors, and I don't plan to. Most of the time I push it out of my mind, but every now and then, early in the morning when I'm half asleep, I think about it. Tall, dark, and standing on two legs in the middle of nowhere. And I remember the fear. That fear reminds me that sometimes there are things out there that don't fit our normal ideas of what lives in the wild. I don't claim to know what it was. I only know what I saw. And that's enough to keep me looking over my shoulder anytime I'm out before dawn. I never imagined a cheap beach rental could turn into a night of pure tension. I booked that house with my two friends, Roger and David, hoping for a simple getaway. The price was low, and the location sounded good enough. It was around 500 meters from the shore, so we figured we could handle a slightly run-down place. We just wanted to spend the weekend relaxing, maybe swimming, and not worry about city noise or tight schedules. When we first arrived in the afternoon, I felt a wave of disappointment the moment I stepped inside. The air smelled musty, like it had been trapped for months without proper ventilation. There were cobwebs in the corners, and the walls looked damp. I remember rubbing my nose because the smell irritated me. The living room was small, with old furniture placed in a random arrangement. The couch had a faded color, and the coffee table had scratches on top. The kitchen looked functional, but the fridge made a buzzing sound that got on my nerves. I wasn't too worried about style. I just hoped everything worked. We unpacked our stuff in the 2 bedrooms. One bedroom had a bed that creaked every time I placed my backpack on it. The other bedroom seemed a bit better, but the mattress looked old. There was an extra room in the back, filled with unused chairs and boxes. The floors were dusty, so we opened the windows to let some air in. Outside, the yard had tall grass that brushed against the back fence, and I saw some weeds near the front gate. The gate itself was made of iron bars, rising above my shoulders. It had a rusted chain locking it from the inside. I walked around to check out the neighborhood. I noticed there weren't many occupied houses. Some looked abandoned with broken windows or boarded-up doors. Others had lights off and no cars in the driveway. It was the kind of place where you expected a tourism vibe, but it felt empty. Even though the beach was a few minutes away, I saw no sign of shops, bars, or people strolling around. That gave me a strange feeling. I told Roger, "Let's not count on finding a convenience store. We might need to drive to the next town if we need groceries." Roger nodded and agreed we should pick up snacks and drinks before it got dark. We drove to a small market about 10 minutes away. The store had a dim light and a single aisle with basic items. We grabbed water, sodas, bread, and some sandwich fillings. The owner of the store barely spoke to us. He just watched us from behind the counter, arms crossed. After we paid, we headed back to the house. The sun was going down, and I recall the breeze was getting stronger. The ocean air felt damp on my skin, and the salty smell mixed with that stale odor in the house. By the time night arrived, the place was dark. There were no street lamps, so the only light came from our porch lamp and a single bulb in the hallway inside. The living room had a small overhead light, but it flickered sometimes. We decided to keep our phones nearby in case we needed extra light. We sat around, played some card games on the rickety coffee table, and ate a quick dinner of sandwiches. I could hear the wind whistling through gaps in the window frames. The noise reminded me that we were more isolated than I had realized. Around 10 p.m. and the wind picked up even more. The window in the kitchen rattled and the back door shook slightly. I got up to check if the door was locked properly. It was locked, but the old wooden frame didn't feel very solid. I remember looking through the kitchen window trying to see if there was anything outside. It was pitch black. The yard looked empty, but I had to squint to make out the shape of the fence. The sky above was cloudy, so the moonlight was weak. We decided to watch something on Roger's laptop to pass the time. We gathered in the living room, turned off the overhead light to see the screen better, and settled in. I felt uneasy but tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just the unfamiliar atmosphere. Nobody else seemed relaxed either. David kept tapping his foot on the floor. Roger wouldn't stop checking his phone. About 30 minutes into the movie, I heard a faint thud from the back wall. At first, I thought the wind had knocked something over, so I paused the laptop to listen. We stayed silent. The sound came again, a series of dull knocks on the outside wall. It wasn't a regular rhythm. It sounded like someone tossing small rocks or tapping with something solid. My pulse quickened. I whispered to David and Roger, "Do you hear that?" They both nodded. We stood up, trying not to make noise with our chairs. I tiptoed to the window near the back door and peered out. It was dark, but I could see movement by the fence. I saw shapes, at least 3 figures wearing dark hooded jackets. I felt a rush of cold through my body. My stomach tightened and I swallowed hard. These people were standing on our property near the back fence. One of them picked something up from the ground and threw it against the wall, causing that knocking sound. Then I heard one of them shout something, but I couldn't make out the words. It sounded angry. Another one came closer to the house, walking near the side wall. Roger hissed in a low voice, "What do we do?" I gestured for him to stay quiet. I didn't want them to know we were alert. After a few seconds, we heard more shouts. They were saying, "Who's in there?" But their tone wasn't slurred like a drunk's. It felt like a challenge. My heart hammered in my chest. I carefully backed away from the window, making sure not to cast a silhouette against any light. David went to lock the front door. Roger grabbed a kitchen knife and handed another one to me. I didn't like the idea of confronting anyone, but I wanted something in my hand. My palms were sweaty, and my mouth went dry. Suddenly, I heard metal clinking near the front gate. I guessed they were messing with the chain or trying to see if the gate would budge. One of them yelled again, "Is anyone in the house?" The others mumbled and laughed. I could tell they weren't just random people looking for help. This felt deliberate, like they wanted to scare us or force their way in. I crept to the living room window and peeked out. There was a faint light from the porch that barely illuminated the front gate. I saw a figure tugging on the chain. He wore a hood and a dark scarf over his face. They kept circling the property, heading around the side toward the back again. I could hear their footsteps crunching the gravel. I pressed my ear to the wall. The wind made it hard to hear everything, but I caught bits of their conversation. Words like, "check the door," and "look over there," reached my ears. My mind raced. I grabbed my phone and dialed the local police station. A woman answered, sounding tired. I explained the situation, told her where we were, and asked for immediate help. She said they only had one patrol car available because of the holiday weekend, but she would send it over. I felt a surge of frustration and fear. I had no idea how long it would take for them to arrive. Meanwhile, those guys were prowling around the yard, testing the windows and rattling the doors. At one point, the back doorknob jiggled. I held my breath, standing right on the other side. The doorknob turned back and forth, and I was sure they were about to force it open. Roger stood behind me, gripping the knife so hard his knuckles turned white. David was in the living room, making sure the front door stayed locked. Every minute passed with no sign of the police. My mind kept jumping between different worries. Would they break a window? Would they smash the door? Were they armed with guns? I couldn't see any firearms, but they had their hands hidden in pockets and under their jackets. The uncertainty made the anxiety worse. I felt my chest tighten with every strange sound. The wind blew through the trees, rustling leaves, creating sudden movements in my peripheral vision. That made it impossible to calm down. At one point, one of them kicked something against the side wall. The impact sent a loud thump through the house. It made Roger jump. He cursed under his breath, and I turned around to hush him. I was afraid they'd hear us and get more aggressive. I stared at my phone, glancing at the time. Only 10 minutes had passed since I called the police. It felt longer. My heart was pounding so fast I could feel my pulse in my ears. From the window, I saw one of the intruders scanning the yard with a small flashlight. The beam of light moved across the bushes, hit the porch steps, and then swung over the windows. I ducked behind the wall, trying not to be seen. The flashlight swept across the yard again, then flicked off. I heard muffled talking. I leaned closer to the window, but the wind carried their voices away. I only heard a few words. "No lights on. Maybe inside. Keep checking." The tension kept building. My back ached from standing still in a crouched position. My legs felt weak and my breathing was shallow. At one point, Roger whispered, "Let's call the cops again." I told him to wait a bit because I didn't want to make any noise. The phone had a bright screen, and I was worried they might notice. We waited another 5 minutes, listening to the intruders stomp around. Then I heard a sound from the front gate area. It was the chain rattling again, followed by footsteps near the outside wall. David crept over to me and mouthed the words, "They're leaving?" I shook my head. I couldn't tell. Everything was confusing. Then, in the distance, I caught a low engine sound. It grew louder, and soon, headlights skimmed across the edge of the front yard. I guessed it was the police car approaching. The intruders must have heard it too, because I heard urgent whispers among them. They moved quickly toward the back fence. I heard them push something aside, a metal clank or a piece of fence being unhooked. Then I heard them running. Their footsteps faded into the darkness behind the house. A wave of relief mixed with lingering fear rushed over me. My knees felt like they could buckle. We stayed in the house, still silent, until the police car pulled up in front. I saw its red and blue lights flashing through the window. 2 officers stepped out. They shone a flashlight through the gate, called out, "Police!" We unlocked the door and let them in. I explained everything. They checked around the yard, but those guys were long gone. They found footprints in the dirt near the fence, but nothing else. No sign of forced entry, no damage besides a few scuffed marks on the walls. The officers told us they'd patrol the area a few times that night, but they warned that they might have to deal with other calls. They suggested we keep our lights on and lock everything. One of them mentioned that burglaries and attempted break-ins happen sometimes in these remote areas. With so few police on duty during a holiday, it was hard for them to respond quickly. After they left, the three of us stood in the living room, staring at one another. David rubbed his arms. Roger sat on the couch, exhaling in relief. I felt drained, like I had just run a mile. None of us wanted to stay another night, but it was already past midnight, and we weren't sure if it was wise to drive around in the dark. We decided to stay until morning, but agreed to leave as soon as the sun came up. We pushed a heavy cabinet against the back door for extra security. We checked all the windows, jammed some chairs under the doorknobs, and left the living room light on. We tried to rest, but nobody slept well. I dozed off for maybe an hour, but every small noise made my heart race. In the early morning, we packed our stuff as fast as we could. We didn't bother cleaning up too much. We loaded the car, locked the house, and drove away. On the drive back, we barely talked. I kept replaying the events of the night in my head. The moment I saw those three figures outside, the way they tested every door, and the panic I felt waiting for the police. My hands were still shaking at the steering wheel. Later, I told a few relatives what happened, but I never got a solid answer. I don't know if those men were planning a burglary or something else. The police never followed up with any big discoveries. They filed a report, but that was all. I still think about it when I rent places in unfamiliar areas. I triple-check doors and windows, and I pay attention to my gut feeling. That night was enough to put me on edge for a long time. Even now, when I remember the knocks on that moldy wall, I feel my stomach clench. It's a memory I wish I could forget, but it stays with me. I used to think I knew every inch of my building. It's an old 4-story place with creaky steps and chipped paint on the walls. 2 apartments on each floor, dim lights in the hallway, and a front door that groans whenever someone opens it. People here mostly keep to themselves, but I've always felt safe. That changed when I noticed the man standing in front of 302. I saw him for the first time early in the morning. I leave for work around 5, sometimes earlier. I was walking up the second flight of stairs to reach the front door because the elevator here almost never works. As I climbed toward the landing between the 3rd and 4th floors, I spotted him near the door of 302. He wore a faded baseball cap and carried 2 plastic bags. I couldn't see his face well, but his posture made me think he was waiting for something or someone. I didn't want to be rude, so I said a quick, "Hey, morning." He didn't move. He didn't look at me. He just stood there. I remember pausing, thinking maybe he had earphones on, but I didn't see any wires or earbuds. So I tried again. "Morning." No reply. I shrugged and walked off. I was in a hurry to catch a bus, so I didn't push it. That evening, the doorman, Carlos, mentioned something that made my stomach drop. I asked him if someone had finally bought 302. He frowned and said, "No, it's been vacant for months. The owner listed it for sale, but nobody's moved in." "Why do you ask?" I told him I saw someone in front of the door. Carlos gave me a confused look. "That's strange. I haven't logged any new visitors for that apartment. Last potential buyer was weeks ago. Maybe a neighbor had a guest wandering around?" I didn't have an answer. I just said goodnight and went up to my place on the 4th floor. I didn't see anything unusual on my way up that night. The hallway was quiet. No strange noises, no one lurking near 302. But as I got ready for bed, I kept thinking about the man with the cap and those plastic bags. Over the next few weeks, I got busier at work and forgot about it. But one Wednesday morning, I was rushing out again around 5. I was still groggy because I'd been up late. When I passed the 3rd floor, I saw him again, standing in the exact same spot as before. This time, I decided to speak more loudly. "Hey man, do you live here?" I asked. He didn't respond. He kept his head down. I could see the brim of his cap. The plastic bags were at his feet. It sounded like they might have cans or metal objects inside, judging by the dull, clinking noise when he shifted his weight. I moved closer. "Everything okay?" I spoke clearly. I wanted to see if he was all right or if he needed help. He slowly turned his head, but I couldn't see his face under that cap. The hallway light was too weak and his cap cast a shadow over his eyes. He seemed to stare at me, but I couldn't be sure. Without a word, he stepped backward and opened the door to 302. He disappeared inside and shut it. I heard the lock click. That set off a jolt of nerves in my stomach. As far as I knew, that apartment was still empty. There shouldn't have been any furniture or lights inside. I felt a prickling sensation on my arms. Something wasn't right. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to figure out what to do. I had to get to work, but this was bothering me. Finally, I hurried down to the lobby. Carlos was on duty, so I told him that I just saw a guy enter 302 and lock the door from the inside. Carlos shook his head. That's impossible. There's no electricity in there. The realtor gave me the keys last month and it's completely cleared out. Let's check it. We took the elevator up to the 3rd floor. The elevator rattled and groaned. My heart pounded the entire ride. I was imagining worst-case scenarios. Was he a squatter? Was he dangerous? Did he break in? I felt my palms sweating. I wiped them on my pant legs. When we got out, the hallway was quiet. The door to 302 looked normal. No signs of forced entry. Carlos took out his key ring and tried a few different ones until one fit. We stepped inside. The apartment was pitch dark, so he used his phone's flashlight. The living room was empty. No furniture, not even a fold-out chair or a rug. The walls were bare. The windows were closed. No curtains, no blinds. The kitchen had nothing but an old fridge that was unplugged. The bedroom doors were open. Both rooms were completely vacant. There was no sign of the man, no plastic bags, no footprints on the dusty floor. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. I walked around, opened a closet, flicked a light switch out of habit. Nothing happened. The place had no bulbs. The circuit breaker was off because no one was paying for power. I looked at Carlos. He stared back, looking uneasy. He moved the flashlight over every corner. Nothing. This is weird, he said. Are you sure you saw someone go in here? I nodded. My throat felt dry. I told him I heard the door lock. He tried turning the lock inside. It worked fine. No damage. We left the apartment and locked it again. Then we walked back to the lobby. He promised he'd keep an eye out and maybe call the realtor. That day at work, I could barely concentrate. I kept replaying the moment the man turned his head and then closed the door. After that, I started avoiding the 3rd floor. My apartment is on the 4th, but I'd usually just take the elevator straight to my floor, or, if I had to use the stairs, I'd race past 302 without stopping. I told myself it was just my imagination or some weird trick of light, but I wasn't convinced. A few nights later, I got home around midnight. I was exhausted and in a bad mood because of a stressful day. I hit the elevator button. It was out of service again. So I headed toward the stairs. The stairwell was dim, and the overhead light flickered. My feet were dragging. I remember hearing a slight sound from above me like someone's footstep. I stopped. My heart started thumping. I listened for a moment. Nothing. I told myself I was paranoid. I climbed to the 2nd floor landing, then the 3rd. Right when I reached the 3rd floor, I froze. I heard a scraping noise inside 302. It sounded like a chair being dragged across the floor, except there was no furniture in there. My hands felt clammy. I wanted to run upstairs, but I couldn't move at first. My chest felt tight. Then I heard another sound like someone tapping on the wall. I couldn't see anything through the door because it has no peephole. I took a step closer, but as soon as I did, I heard silence. My pulse was racing. I decided to get out of there. I sprinted up to my apartment, locked myself in, and tried to sleep, but I tossed and turned all night, thinking about that noise. The next morning, I went downstairs and told Carlos about it. He looked concerned. He said he'd spoken to the realtor. Nobody had a key besides them and the owner, who lives in another city. No prospective buyers had visited. Carlos offered to check again, but I said I'd rather just forget about it. I didn't want to step inside that empty apartment again. The thought made me feel a cold knot in my stomach. From then on, I made it a habit to listen for any noise when I passed the third floor. Sometimes it was quiet. Sometimes I'd hear a thump or a faint shuffle. One time I thought I smelled cigarette smoke, but the hall was empty. I told a neighbor about it, but she just shrugged and said she hadn't noticed anything. She rarely left her apartment. Another neighbor had just moved in with his girlfriend, and he said he never heard a thing. I felt alone in this. I started to wonder if I was going crazy. I decided to record a voice memo on my phone one evening as I walked by 302. I wanted proof. I walked up the stairs slowly, hit record, and held my phone close to the door. At first, there was only my breathing and the hum of the hallway light. Then faintly, I heard a creak. It could have been the building settling, but it sounded closer, like someone shifting their weight on an old floorboard. My heart pounded against my ribs. I left before I heard anything else. Later that night, I played it back. I could definitely hear a small creak, but nothing dramatic. It could be explained by normal building noises. It wasn't the proof I was hoping for. Still, it gave me chills. A few days later, I had an early shift and woke up around 4 in the morning. I was half asleep, but I needed to move fast to catch a bus. As I stepped out of my apartment, I thought I heard movement downstairs. It was too early for most neighbors. I walked down a flight, careful not to make noise. When I reached the third floor landing, I saw the faint outline of someone standing at the end of the corridor. It was that same shape, a man wearing a cap and holding something in his hands. My heart started pounding. He didn't move. He just stood there. The hallway light flickered for a second, and when it came back, he was gone. I'm not exaggerating. I saw no sign of him. I felt a jolt of adrenaline in my chest like a punch. My breath caught in my throat. I almost dropped my keys. I ran downstairs so fast that I nearly tripped. When I reached the lobby, I saw Carlos behind the desk. I wanted to tell him what happened, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. My mouth felt dry. I just nodded at him and walked out to catch my bus. When I got home that evening, I felt uneasy the moment I entered the building. I checked my mail and walked to the elevator. It was working for once, so I got in and pressed 4. The doors closed and the elevator started to climb. I felt relief that I wouldn't have to pass the third floor on foot. But as the elevator stopped on the third floor, without me pressing the button, I felt my stomach twist. The doors opened to a dark hallway. No one was there. I stabbed at the close door button, but it took a moment to respond. Finally, it shut, and I went up to my floor. My heart didn't stop racing until I was safely inside my place. Since then, I've tried my best to ignore 302. I'm not proud of it, but I've started taking the stairs only when I'm with another neighbor, or I wait until the elevator arrives to go up and down. If the elevator stops on the third floor, I keep my finger on the door close button. I don't want to see anything or anyone there. I still hear things sometimes, light footsteps, a faint rustling, or the door handle rattling. Every time I feel goosebumps. I keep telling myself it's an old building, and old buildings make sounds. But that doesn't explain the man I saw twice or the way he opened 302 and locked it behind him. It doesn't explain why I still get the feeling that someone is watching me when I walk by. I've tried to distract myself with work and chores around my place, but the tension never goes away completely. I told a friend about it, and he suggested I move out. I don't have the money for that right now, and the thought of leaving everything behind because of this feels extreme. Yet every time I step into the building, I brace myself. I check the corners. I look up the stairwell before climbing. Carlos has done a few more inspections of 302 with me present. It's always empty. The dust on the floor never looks disturbed. There are no footprints besides our own. The windows are locked from the inside. The counters are bare. I don't see any sign that someone is staying there, but it doesn't stop me from hearing those steps late at night. It doesn't stop me from seeing that shadow in the hall sometimes. I don't have an explanation. I wish I did. All I know is I avoid passing the third floor as much as possible. But in an old building like this, sometimes I have no choice. Sometimes I can't help but walk down that hallway where I once saw a man who shouldn't be there. And every single time, my stomach tightens, my hair stands on end, and I hurry to get away. No matter what anyone says, I know what I saw. And I keep hearing those footsteps. That's my story. It might sound ridiculous, but it's what happened. And it's still happening. If I have to leave here one day, it's probably going to be because of apartment 302. I don't know what's going on inside that place, but it's enough to make me think twice about living in an old building where the walls creak and the doors lock on their own. For now, I'm just trying to deal with it. When I walk by at night, my chest tightens and my senses go on high alert. I listen for any sign that he's there. Sometimes I think I see a slight movement by the door. Sometimes I don't. Either way, I keep my distance. I've got no interest in finding out what's really going on in 302, if it means risking my peace of mind any more than I already have. I'd rather pretend it's empty, even though I know that's not true. And when I hear those steps in the middle of the night, I just turn over and tell myself it's my imagination. But deep down, I know something is there, and I can't explain it. I moved into this small apartment in the center of the city because I wanted to cut my commute time. I never expected I'd end up losing sleep almost every night. I thought living closer to work would simplify my life. Instead, it's made me question my sanity. The first few days were fine. I unpacked quickly, tried to settle in, and told myself this was the start of a better routine. Then, on my fourth night here, I woke up to a blaring fire alarm in the hallway. It blasted through the walls around 2:30 a.m. I jumped up, heart pounding, and ran to the door. I was half asleep, confused, but I knew that sound wasn't normal. I yanked the door open and looked out. I didn't see any smoke. I didn't smell anything burning. I just heard the same ear-splitting alarm echoing off the old walls. After a few minutes, it stopped on its own. The next morning, I tracked down the superintendent. Our building calls him the syndic, but he's basically the manager. I asked him what happened. He said there was probably some wiring issue and that the alarm system was old. He said he'd get someone to fix it. I believed him. That was my first mistake. It happened again the next night at around the same time. Another ear-splitting alarm with no smoke, no fire, and no explanation. I stood in the hallway in my pajamas, confused and annoyed. No one else came out. That was strange. I thought the noise would get everyone's attention, but when I knocked on my neighbor's door, he opened it just a crack. He said he didn't hear anything. Then he closed the door in my face. The building is old, with thick concrete walls and heavy iron windows. There's a certain chill in the corridors, even though the weather's not cold. Every time I walk through those hallways, I notice how quiet it feels. It's like the sound doesn't travel well. But at night, when that alarm goes off, it's so loud, it feels like it's vibrating in my chest. It's impossible to ignore, so I can't figure out why my neighbors act like nothing's wrong. I've talked to them a few times during the day. They all brush it off. They say, "Oh, I sleep through anything," or "I wear earplugs." I don't know if they're telling the truth or just pretending. By the end of my first week, the alarm woke me up every night between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. My eyes were bloodshot because I wasn't getting enough sleep. I tried sleeping pills, but I still heard the alarm. I complained to the manager again. He shrugged and said maybe it was a faulty sensor. That's all he ever says. Faulty sensor. Then he promises an electrician will check it. It never gets fixed. On the sixth night, I had a different experience. The alarm went off as usual. I jumped out of bed, feeling a surge of frustration and fear. I was sweating. My shirt was damp. I walked to my front door and put my hand on the doorknob. I hesitated because I wasn't sure if I really wanted to see whatever was out there. I had this sinking feeling in my chest. I remember my heart beating so hard that it felt like a drum in my ears. I opened the door anyway and saw a thin haze in the hallway. It was like a light mist floating near the ceiling. There was no smell of smoke, no heat, no obvious source. The overhead lights were on, but they seemed dimmer than usual. Then I noticed a shape, a figure standing near the fire extinguisher station at the other end of the corridor. It looked like someone was just standing there, facing my direction. I didn't see any details on the face or the body. It was a dark silhouette, motionless. My first thought was that it was a neighbor checking the extinguisher, but when I took a few steps forward, the shape vanished. I'm not talking about walking away. I mean, it just wasn't there anymore, like I blinked, and it was gone. My neck felt hot. My stomach dropped. I stood there for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. I checked the corridor again, scanning every corner, but there was no one around. I walked over to the fire extinguisher. My footsteps echoed. The thin haze disappeared after a few seconds, or maybe I just got used to it. The alarm was still wailing, and then it suddenly cut off. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise. I touched the extinguisher. It was cold. There were no signs of tampering. I felt a chill run down my spine. I went back to my apartment, locked my door, and slid the chain across. Then I pushed a small table against the door, even though that felt ridiculous. I didn't sleep much the rest of the night. I put up a small security camera outside my door the following day. I wanted to prove to the manager that something weird was happening in the early hours of the morning. The camera recorded on a simple memory card. I tested it around lunchtime, and it captured everything in the hallway just fine. But when the alarm went off that night, I was too disoriented to check the camera right away. I waited until morning. I was sure I'd find something, but the file for that time period was missing. It wasn't corrupted, it was gone, like someone deleted it. That made my skin crawl. I'm not a tech genius, but I know how that camera works. It records continuously. It's not motion activated. So there should have been footage of the alarm going off, me opening the door, the corridor, everything. Instead, it jumped from 1:59 a.m. to 3:01 a.m. I confronted the manager again. I showed him the missing footage, or at least I tried. He shook his head and said maybe the card was defective. Then he repeated the same line about the wiring issue. I asked him why no one else complained. He said they did, once in a while, but not enough to be a big deal. That didn't make sense to me. An alarm blaring in the middle of the night is a big deal, especially multiple nights in a row. He just didn't seem bothered. I asked about the silhouette. I asked if he had seen it on the building's own security cameras. He said the hallway cameras weren't functional right now. Something about them not being fully installed or tested. It sounded like an excuse. Over the next few days, I tried talking to different neighbors, even if I had only seen them once or twice. A couple of them said they heard the alarm once or twice, but not every night. One guy said he never heard anything at all. Another said he wasn't even aware the building had a fire alarm in the corridors. I asked if they had seen any mist or haze. They gave me blank looks and shook their heads. When I pressed them more, they either changed the subject or acted like I was crazy. I started double locking my door at night. I added a second chain and even jammed a chair under the knob. It felt excessive, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My body reacted every time the alarm went off. I'd wake up covered in sweat, my hands shaking, my mouth dry. It was like I was in a constant state of panic. I'd hear the alarm, fling myself out of bed, and check the corridor. Sometimes the corridor was normal, brightly lit, empty, no haze. Other times I saw a faint mist in the distance. A couple of times I thought I saw that shape again, near the exit sign or near the fire extinguisher, but it never stayed long enough for me to see it clearly. It always disappeared the second I tried to focus. I tried sleeping in my living room, thinking maybe being farther from the door would help. It didn't. The alarm still blasted through the walls. One night, I decided not to open my door at all. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the alarm to stop. My heart was racing. My muscles felt tense, and I couldn't calm down. After about 5 minutes, the alarm cut off. Then the hallway went quiet. I heard a faint rustling sound, like someone shuffling their feet outside my door. I got up and pressed my ear against the door. I couldn't make out any distinct words. It sounded like soft breathing or a faint whisper. Then it went away. I told my friend at work about this, and he said maybe I was having stress-related hallucinations. But he came over one evening to hang out, and I told him to stay late, maybe even sleep on the couch to see if it happened again, at 2:10 a.m. And the alarm went off right on schedule. He jumped off the couch, eyes wide, asking what was going on. We both ran to the door, and I pulled it open. The corridor was empty and looked normal. The alarm blared for about 30 seconds. Then it stopped. My friend looked at me and shrugged. I asked if he smelled anything or saw any smoke. He said no. We stepped out into the corridor. Nothing was there. No silhouette, no haze. It felt cold, but that was all. He stayed another 2 hours before deciding to head home, saying he had an early meeting. He said the alarm was weird, but maybe it was just a glitch. Since it didn't happen again while he was there, he seemed unconvinced. On another night, I tried waiting in the corridor before 2 a.m. I got a folding chair and a thermos of coffee. I sat near the elevator and waited. The hallway lights buzzed, and every now and then I heard water running through pipes in the walls. I stayed there, awake and alert, from 1:45 until almost 3 a.m. Nothing happened. As soon as I gave up and returned to my apartment, I heard the alarm. It was like it was deliberately avoiding me. I ran back out, but there was nothing, just the same shrieking noise echoing off the walls. It stopped after a minute. That's when I started feeling that this wasn't just a mechanical failure. But I pushed that thought down because I didn't want to seem paranoid. I tried to approach the manager again, but he cut me off and said, "Look, we've replaced the sensor in your corridor. If you're still hearing an alarm, maybe it's coming from another floor." I asked him to check all floors. He rolled his eyes and said he'd look into it. I knew he wouldn't. I started recording audio on my phone every night. I wanted proof. I'd set it on a table near the door and let it run until morning. Sometimes I'd get a clear recording of the alarm. Other times the audio file would have a sudden gap during that exact time window. It made no sense. My phone's battery was fine, and the storage wasn't full. I considered calling the fire department to see if they had a record of repeated alarms at my address, but I was worried the neighbors would label me a troublemaker. I also didn't want to deal with the hassle if it turned out to be a simple malfunction. I started sleeping less and less. I'd lie in bed, waiting for the alarm. Every little creak in the building made me jump. I was so wired that I sometimes felt anxious even before 2 a.m. The tension would tighten in my chest. My hands would get clammy. I'd start sweating. I felt silly, but I couldn't ignore the physical reaction. I missed the feeling of drifting to sleep without worry. One evening around midnight, I heard a noise outside my door, like metal scraping on metal. I carefully looked through the peephole, but I only saw a slice of the dim hallway. The overhead light flickered. I held my breath, listening. Eventually, the noise stopped. I opened the door, my legs shaking, and checked. The corridor was empty. No one was there. I checked the fire extinguisher area. Nothing was out of place. I went back inside, locked the door again, and pushed the small table against it. I felt ridiculous, but I couldn't help it. The next day, I tried to bring it up with a neighbor who lived at the end of the hall. I asked him if he had ever seen anything near the fire extinguisher. He looked at me like I was speaking another language. He said, "I don't know what you're talking about, man. I've never noticed anything weird." I asked if he heard the alarm. He shook his head and said, "I sleep pretty heavy." Then he muttered something about having to get to work and walked away. It's now been a full month since I moved in. The alarm continues to ring at least 4 nights a week, always between 2 and 3 a.m. Sometimes I see that thin haze. Other times I don't. Sometimes I think I see someone standing in the corridor, but I can't be sure. I've stopped asking the neighbors because they act like I'm bothering them. My manager barely looks me in the eye anymore. I've tried moving furniture around to see if that helps me hear the alarm differently, or if there's some weird acoustics trick. Nothing has changed. My camera still fails to record anything during the alarm. The files vanish without explanation. I keep my door locked with 2 locks now. I've considered installing a third. When the alarm goes off, I usually jump up, dripping sweat with my heart racing. I stand by the door, sometimes pressing my forehead against it, listening for footsteps. I rarely go out into the corridor anymore. I can't handle the feeling of seeing something I can't explain. It makes my chest feel tight. I just wait for the alarm to stop. When it does, I slowly crawl back into bed and stare at the ceiling. My sheets are damp from my sweat. My mouth feels dry. My head pounds. I wonder if I made a huge mistake moving here. I've started thinking about breaking my lease and moving out. I'm not sure if that's even an option. My job is only a few blocks away, and I don't want the hassle of finding another place so soon. But I can't keep living like this, jumping out of bed every night, hearing that alarm, seeing things that may or may not be real. I'm exhausted. My hands tremble when I unlock my door to leave for work in the morning. I'm tired of feeling on edge all the time. I don't know what's causing the alarm. I don't know if there's some twisted prank going on or if there's something else happening in this old building. All I know is that each night, I expect the piercing sound to rip through my sleep. When it does, I feel my pulse hammering, my skin burning with sweat and my mind racing with questions I can't answer. Then I stand by my door, waiting for it to stop, wondering if the silhouette is out there, watching. So far, no one else admits to seeing or hearing anything. I'm alone in this and it's wearing me down. But until I find a way to leave, I'll just keep waking up to that alarm, heart pounding, door locked tight, hoping one night it'll finally stay silent. I'm going to be straight about this. I've never believed in haunted buildings or anything strange lurking in empty hallways. But something is off in the office tower where I work. I can't ignore it anymore. The elevator does weird things after 11 p.m., and it's making me question my own judgment. Every time I think about using it late at night, I feel this tightness in my chest. It sounds ridiculous, but I'm going to explain exactly what happened to me so you can judge for yourself. I work in a 15-story commercial building. Most offices close by 7 p.m. I usually stay later because I have to finish reports for my boss. We have tight deadlines, and I prefer the quiet after everyone leaves. It helps me focus. Around 9 or 10 p.m., the cleaning staff comes around, empties trash bins, vacuums the corridors, and leaves. By 11 p.m., the place is almost empty except for me. Maybe 1 or 2 security guards on the ground floor and the occasional person who forgot something in their office. Normally, I lose track of time because I'm buried in spreadsheets and data. When I glance at the clock, I realize it's nearly midnight, so I pack my laptop, organize my notes, and hurry to the elevators. My routine has been consistent for several months, but about 2 weeks ago, I started noticing the elevator panels acting odd. One night, it was around 11:20 p.m. I walked to the main elevator bank on my floor, which is the 14th. The hallway was deserted. The lights were still on, but that corridor always looks dim after business hours, like half the lights are set to power-saving mode. I pushed the button to call the elevator. I stood there, tapping my foot, staring at the closed elevator doors, just waiting. Then the bell dinged, and the doors opened. I stepped inside and pressed G for the ground floor. I leaned against the back wall. My eyes felt heavy from staring at my computer screen for so many hours. Just as the doors slid shut, I noticed the buttons for floors 5, 7, and 10 also lit up out of nowhere. I thought maybe I'd brushed against the panel, so I double-checked. My fingertips were nowhere near those buttons, but they stayed lit. I tried pressing them again to cancel, but nothing happened. The elevator started moving down, so I figured it was just a glitch. First, it stopped at 10. The doors opened to a dark hallway. All the overhead lights were off except for the small emergency lights near the ceiling. I leaned forward and looked out. I didn't see anyone. The corridor looked completely empty, and I didn't hear anything at first. I pressed the close door button, hoping it would just continue down. But we stood there for a few seconds longer than usual. It felt like the elevator was waiting for something. My arms got goosebumps and my stomach felt tense. Finally, the doors slid shut and the elevator went down to 7. Same situation. The doors opened and there was no one there. I noticed the smell of cleaning chemicals like someone had recently mopped that corridor, but I didn't see any cleaning cart or any sign that someone was working. Again, the elevator paused for a long moment before moving on. This time, the hairs on my neck stood up. It was a simple thing, an empty floor, but it made me uneasy. The place felt abandoned, but I had a strong sense I wasn't alone. Then it stopped at 5. The doors opened, but the lights in that hallway were still on. I saw the open door of some office, which was unusual because I knew all those offices should be locked by 7 p.m. I almost called out, but I kept quiet. I felt this sudden rush of nerves, like I shouldn't draw attention to myself. I reached out and tapped the close door button again. This time it closed without any delay. The elevator took me to the ground floor. I walked out, expecting to see the security guard at the front desk. He wasn't there. I looked around and found him outside by the main entrance smoking a cigarette. I didn't mention what happened because I thought it was just a technical bug. The next day I got to work, forgot about it, and had a normal schedule until 10:30 p.m. I finished my tasks and headed to the elevator. Nothing weird happened that night, or the next. I assumed it had been a one-time glitch. But then it happened again a few days later. It was almost 11:45 p.m. I stepped into the elevator, pressed G, and saw that 8 and 13 lit up on their own. I tried to ignore it, but my heartbeat was pounding. I felt that same chill on my arms. On 13, the doors opened, and I smelled something musty, like old cardboard boxes and stale air. I waited, listening for any sound. The elevator car felt too quiet. I could hear my own breathing. Then, a faint clatter came from somewhere down the hall. It sounded like a door latch or a loose piece of metal hitting the floor. It only lasted a second, but I jumped. I slapped the close door button and the doors shut quickly. I got off at the ground floor, saw the security guard on his phone, and again, I said nothing. I felt stupid for being jumpy over an elevator. Still, it weighed on my mind. My nights got more stressful. I'd finish my work, but I'd dread that elevator ride. The building has a stairwell, but it's 15 flights down. I'm usually exhausted. My knees ache if I walk that much with a heavy bag. So I kept using the elevator, even though it gave me the creeps. Then came the night that pushed me over the edge. It was a Thursday, around 11:30 p.m. I had just wrapped up some final touches on a marketing report. I packed my laptop, grabbed my notes, and left my office on the 14th floor. The hallway was silent. I walked to the elevator as usual, pressed the button, and waited. When the doors opened, I got inside. I pressed G. Immediately, floors 10 and 12 lit up. I backed away from the panel. My heart was racing. I could hear my pulse in my ears. I tried to keep calm. I thought about ignoring it again, but I couldn't. I pressed the 10 and 12 buttons to see if they'd turn off, but they stayed lit. The elevator went down to 12 first. The doors opened. The corridor was dim, with only 1 or 2 ceiling lights on. My stomach felt tight. I didn't step out, but I leaned forward, holding the door frame. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" My voice echoed, but I got no answer. I heard what sounded like a distant whisper, but it might have been air conditioning or some other mechanical noise. I waited a few seconds, then pressed the door close button. We moved down to 10. The doors opened. The hallway was even darker than 12. I saw that the lights were off except for a single bulb near the elevator. The rest of the corridor stretched into darkness. I hesitated, thinking maybe I should try another elevator or go to the stairs, but it was already open, and I was tired. I stayed in the elevator. That's when I heard a strange noise. It sounded like tiny wheels squeaking or rolling on the floor, like a small suitcase or a cart being pulled along. It came from the right side of the corridor beyond the elevator's light. My pulse sped up. My throat felt dry. I spoke up. "Hey, do you need help?" No response. I listened carefully. My palms were sweating. I adjusted my grip on my laptop bag. Then I heard soft footsteps, like someone walking away. They faded after a few seconds, and I stood there waiting. I was about to hit the door close button when a loud bang echoed through that hallway. It sounded like something heavy hitting a metal surface. I flinched so hard my shoulders jerked. I looked out, but I saw nothing except darkness. I jabbed the close door button over and over. The elevator didn't react right away. It stayed open for what felt like several long seconds. My eyes darted around the corridor, trying to see if anyone was there. The smell of dust was strong in the air. Finally, the doors began to slide shut. Then the elevator's overhead light flickered. It flashed off and on, making the interior feel smaller and claustrophobic. My breath caught in my throat. My heart pounded so loud I thought I could hear it echo off the walls. After that, the elevator moved downward. The ride was bumpy, like it was struggling. My knees felt weak. I gripped the railing on the side of the elevator. I just kept waiting for it to jerk to a stop, but it didn't. It reached the ground floor without further interruptions. When the doors opened, I practically leaped into the lobby. The security guard was standing near the front desk, watching a small TV. He saw my face and asked if I was okay. I told him I was just tired. He nodded, but I could see he was curious. I didn't feel like explaining. I just wanted to get out of there. The next morning, I thought about reporting the elevator issue to the building manager, but I wasn't sure how to describe it without sounding paranoid. I told myself it might be some wiring problem that causes the elevator to pick random floors. I tried to forget the sounds I heard on the 10th floor, but my mind kept returning to that noise of rolling wheels and that loud bang. I can't figure out what caused it or why it happened so suddenly. A few nights later, I worked late again. This time, I walked to the stairwell. I pushed open the heavy door and looked down the dark concrete steps. There were 14 flights ahead of me. The lighting was dim and flickered in some places. I took a deep breath and started walking. By the 10th floor, my legs were already burning. I paused to catch my breath. I noticed the door to the 10th floor corridor. It had a small window. The hallway behind it was dark. My chest felt tight just looking at it. I thought about those sounds, that loud crash. I forced myself to keep walking down the stairs. When I finally reached the ground floor, I was sweating. My legs shook from fatigue. The security guard gave me a puzzled look, and I just nodded to him and went out. Walking down that many flights wasn't fun, but it felt safer than riding the elevator at midnight. The next day, my calves were sore. I tried not to complain, but I limped a bit around the office. My coworkers asked if I hurt myself, and I just said I had a rough workout. I haven't told anyone in my department about the elevator. I tried bringing it up casually with the security guard, but he just shrugged and said he hasn't noticed anything weird. He did mention that some nights, the elevator moves by itself to certain floors, which he thinks is part of a cleaning cycle or an automated system. But he admitted he's never heard any unusual noises. That didn't make me feel any better. Now, every time it gets close to 11 p.m., I start feeling that knot in my stomach. I wrap up my work faster. I check my watch constantly. Some nights I risk the elevator and hold my breath the entire ride, hoping the button panel stays normal. On other nights, I take the stairs, even if it means my legs will be sore for the next 2 days. I can't predict which nights the elevator will act up. It's random. One evening, I asked the cleaning staff if they'd ever seen anything strange on the 10th floor. The guy in charge of vacuuming said that a few times he's gone up there and found the hallway lights off even though they're supposed to stay on until morning. But he didn't mention hearing any odd sounds. He just said it's always lonely up there and sometimes the doors are locked. He's heard the air ducts make loud bangs, but that's about it. Those explanations don't match what I experienced. The noise I heard wasn't a simple metallic clang from an air duct. It was something hitting metal with force, almost like a door slamming or a large object falling. And the rolling wheels sounded too deliberate, like a person pulling something heavy. But there's no one working that late up there, at least not anyone I know. I've considered the possibility of a squatter situation or some unauthorized person using an empty office at night. The thought of confronting a stranger in a dark hallway freaks me out just as much as the idea of a haunted elevator. It could be a real person messing around, but that doesn't explain the buttons lighting up on their own. I've gotten more paranoid. Lately, I try to leave by 9 p.m. just to avoid being there so late. My boss asked why I'm clocking out earlier than usual, and I said I was trying a healthier schedule. He seemed happy about it and didn't ask more. But some nights I still can't finish everything by 9, so I have no choice but to stay. On those nights, I feel a heavy sense of dread when I finally shut down my computer and walk to the lobby. If I see a coworker leaving at the same time, I'll make an excuse to share the elevator with them. I figure if there's someone else in there with me, maybe the elevator won't do anything strange, or at least I won't be alone if it does. But most of the time, I'm by myself. The building gets so quiet that even the smallest sound echoes. I'm at the point now where I'm considering asking for an office relocation, or maybe buying an apartment closer so I can finish work at home. It sounds dramatic, but I can't shake off these experiences. I keep replaying that moment on the 10th floor in my head. The squeaking wheels, the faint footsteps, and that sudden crash. I remember how my heart felt like it would tear out of my chest when the elevator light flickered. Those few seconds felt like an hour. I thought someone might appear in front of the doors at any moment. Nobody has died, nobody has disappeared, and I haven't seen anything with my own eyes beyond dark hallways and strange shadows. Yet the fear feels real. My body's reaction is intense, sweaty palms, racing heart, shaky legs. I know it's not just my imagination. Something odd is happening in that elevator after 11 p.m. I'm not making any accusations. I'm just describing exactly what's been going on. It's not normal for an elevator to stop on multiple floors you never selected. It's not normal to hear suspicious noises late at night in empty corridors. Whatever it is, I'm done taking chances. I still have work to do in that building, but I'm going to be more careful. If I have to leave after 11 p.m., I'll use the stairs, even though it kills my knees. At least until I can figure out a better solution. That's where I stand. I can't prove anything, but I know what I've seen and heard, and I'm not going to ignore it anymore. I got home one night and saw that old family portrait leaning at a weird angle on my living room wall. It happened again. My chest felt tight. I remember thinking, who keeps messing with this thing? I live alone, so there's no one else here. I keep my doors locked. I don't have a roommate, nobody has a spare key. Yet the portrait was off-center, like someone had grabbed it and pushed it sideways. That was the moment I knew something wasn't right. 6 months ago, my mother passed away. She left me some furniture and a big framed photo taken sometime in the 1970s. In that photo, there are my grandparents, my mother as a teenager, and a few of my uncles. When I got it, I felt a tug in my chest. I couldn't shake the sense that this picture carried a bunch of memories I didn't fully understand. It was taken long before I was born, so it showed a version of my mother I never knew in real life. I wanted to honor her, so I hung it up on the wall in my living room. I liked seeing her face every morning on my way out. I remember the first time I noticed something odd. I woke up on a Sunday, walked into the living room, and glanced at the portrait. It was tilted about 2 inches off-center. The right edge was lower than the left edge, like someone had grabbed it and pulled it down. I had hammered a sturdy nail into the wall, so I didn't get why it would move. I straightened it and went about my day. I thought maybe I bumped it by accident, but I was alone that day, and I'm pretty sure I didn't go near the wall. A few days later, I came home from work around 7 p.m. I put my bag on the couch and looked up. The portrait was crooked again, but now it was in the other direction. It wasn't a lot, but enough that I could see it was off balance. I walked over and tried to see if there was an issue with the wire or the nail. Everything looked normal. The wire was still hooked in. The nail was still secure in the wall. The back of the frame wasn't damaged. I straightened it again. I told myself it might be humidity or a draft, but it was summer, and I keep my windows closed when I'm not home. There was no strong breeze. There was no reason for it to tilt on its own. I tried not to think much about it. I turned on the TV, microwaved a quick dinner, and tried to relax. But an hour later, I glanced over, and it was crooked again. Same direction, left side lower this time. My throat felt dry. My arms felt cold. I stared at the photo. My grandparents had that typical old-fashioned pose. My uncles looked stiff, standing behind the chairs. My mother was sitting next to my grandmother with a small smile. But as I stared at that smile, I felt uneasy. It looked different than I remembered. It seemed less friendly. I wondered if I was imagining things. I walked over and straightened the frame again, then pressed my hand against it for a moment to make sure it wouldn't move. That night I woke up around 3 a.m. I thought I heard footsteps in the hall. I got up, turned on the light, and walked around the apartment. No one was there. The doors were locked. The windows were closed. I checked the portrait. It was still straight, so I went back to bed. My heart wouldn't stop pounding, so I lay there, staring at the ceiling. Eventually, I drifted off again. 3 days later, on a Saturday afternoon, I was cleaning the living room. I had a damp rag in my hand and was about to dust the glass on the portrait. I stepped in front of it and looked at my reflection. I saw my own face, but behind me I swore I saw something else. It looked like a faint outline of a face I didn't recognize. It was blurry, but I caught it at the corner of my eye. I spun around, but there was no one behind me. My hands started sweating. I tried to tell myself it was just the glare or a smudge on the glass. I wiped it down carefully, but I felt a strange energy in the room. I couldn't explain it. My chest felt heavy, like there was an invisible weight pressing down on me. I kept trying to push these thoughts out of my head. I told myself I was just emotional because of my mother's passing. I thought maybe I was projecting my sadness onto this old photograph. But I couldn't deny that weird things kept happening. Little by little, the smile on my mother's face in the photo began to look different. It used to be a soft smile, almost shy. Now, whenever I looked at it, the corners of her mouth seemed tense. Her lips looked slightly downturned. I didn't see that smile I remembered. I kept thinking the lighting in my living room might be causing the shift, or maybe I was just in a bad mood. But every time I walked past it, I felt like her face was changing. Late one night, around 11 p.m., I was in the kitchen grabbing a drink of water. I heard a quiet scraping sound in the living room, like something sliding against the wall. I froze. I stood there, listening. My skin felt clammy. I tiptoed toward the living room. The scraping stopped. I turned on the light. The portrait was crooked again, about an inch lower on the right side. I breathed out hard. My legs felt weak. I walked over, touched the frame, and noticed it was cold to the touch. The wall itself felt normal, but the frame was colder than I expected. I glanced at the photo. My mother's eyes looked different to me. They seemed focused on me, not just staring out. I know it sounds crazy, but I felt like she was looking at me with concern or disapproval. My hands shook as I straightened the frame. I left the light on when I went to bed. Over the next week, I tried to ignore it. I had a busy schedule at work. I left early, came home late, ate dinner, and went to sleep. But every time I passed by that photo, I felt uneasy. Sometimes I would see a flicker in the glass, almost like a reflection moving when I wasn't in front of it. One day, I got angry. I actually said out loud, "Stop it," as if someone was listening. I didn't know who I was talking to. It made me feel foolish, but I was so on edge that I wanted it to stop. One Thursday evening, I came home around 8 p.m. after a long day. I opened my door, turned on the light, and saw the entire portrait on the floor. It wasn't lying flat in the usual way a picture might fall if it slipped off the nail. It was propped against the wall, almost like someone had gently placed it there. The wire in the back was still intact. The nail was still in the wall. I couldn't figure out how it landed in that position. It didn't look like it had fallen. It looked like it had been removed and set down. I stood there, not sure what to do. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I stepped closer and reached for the frame. That's when I noticed a thin scratch on the glass, right over my mother's face. It was a small line, but it cut across her cheek in the photo. I touched the glass and felt a slight groove. It was fresh. I knew it wasn't there before, because I'd looked at this picture too many times. There was also a little bit of chip paint on the wall behind where the frame had hung, like someone had ripped it away from the nail. I looked around, thinking maybe someone broke in, but nothing else was disturbed. My TV was still there, my laptop was on the table, and my front door was locked. The windows were locked too. No sign of forced entry. I picked the portrait up and set it on the couch. I felt my breath getting faster. My stomach was in knots. I kept thinking, how did this happen? I tried to tell myself the nail gave out, but the nail was still solid in the wall. The wire was still attached. There was no reason for it to come down like that. I went through every logical possibility in my mind. I checked the door for scratch marks or any sign of someone picking the lock, but nothing. I checked every window latch. They were secure. I walked around the apartment, opening closets and cabinets, looking for someone hiding. That felt stupid, but I did it anyway. No one was there. I picked the portrait back up, examining the scratch on the glass. I noticed that the scratch lined up perfectly with the edge of my mother's cheek, as if a thin blade had slid across that part. I traced it with my finger. It didn't go beyond her face. My hair stood on end. My hands were shaking. I started to sweat. I wiped my forehead and placed the frame gently on the coffee table. I didn't want to hang it back up that night. It didn't feel right. I ended up sleeping in my bedroom with the door locked. I know that sounds dramatic, but I had this wave of fear wash over me. My hands were cold, and my throat felt tight. I kept thinking, something's wrong with that portrait. But I couldn't just toss it. It belonged to my mother, and it had all my family in it. I felt guilty even thinking about getting rid of it. Still, I had no idea how to handle what I was experiencing. The next morning, I got up early and went to the living room. The portrait was still on the coffee table. I stared at that scratch. It cut through the glass with a thin, jagged line. I touched the glass again, hoping it was some kind of smudge, but it was real. I decided to check the back of the frame for any sign of tampering. I removed the cardboard backing. The photo itself was faded from age, but the scratch didn't go all the way to the paper. It was just on the glass surface. Everything else looked normal. I thought about putting it in a closet or something, but I didn't want to disrespect my mother's memory. I took a shower, had some coffee, and tried to calm down. The rest of the day, I avoided that corner of the living room. I kept walking past it, and each time I felt a rush of anxiety. I ended up calling a friend, but I didn't tell them everything. I only said I was having some issues with weird noises. I didn't want to sound crazy. They offered to come by, but I said no. I didn't want anyone else messing with that photo or telling me I was nuts. I felt like I had to handle it myself. That afternoon, I tried to hang the portrait again, just to see if everything would go back to normal. I used the same nail and wire, double-checked the height, and put it up. I stepped back. It looked okay. I waited about an hour, kept an eye on it, and it stayed in place. But as soon as I went to grab a drink from the kitchen, I heard a thump. Not a loud crash, just a dull thump. I rushed back in, and the portrait was sitting on the floor again. Same position as before, propped against the wall. The wire was still around the nail. It was like it had been lifted off and set down. I didn't see it happen. I just saw the aftermath. My heart was racing. My face felt hot. I picked it up, set it on the couch, and stood there. My mind was spinning with questions. I didn't hear a break-in. There was no one else in the apartment. I checked the windows again. Everything was locked. I couldn't explain it. I sat on the couch, staring at my mother's face in the photo. Her expression looked colder to me now, but maybe that was just my imagination. I decided to leave it off the wall for a while. I couldn't deal with it anymore that day. I placed the portrait in a spare room next to some boxes. I shut the door and tried to distract myself with TV and other stuff. But I kept feeling like something was behind the door, watching me. I know how that sounds, but I swear I felt it. My shoulders were tense, and I had to keep reminding myself to breathe normally. Every little sound in the apartment made me jump. My phone ringing caused me to flinch. I was that wound up. For the next few nights, I slept with the hallway light on. Nothing else moved or fell. I didn't hear any footsteps, but I couldn't relax. I still felt like the air in my place was different, like it was thicker than normal. The scratch on my mother's face in that photo lingered in my mind. I kept thinking about how it appeared. Was it random damage, or was there a reason it targeted her face? I don't have any explanation. All I know is that after I found the frame on the floor with that scratch, I haven't been able to shake the feeling that the portrait carries something I can't understand. I don't know if I'll ever get comfortable with it again. And that's where I stand now, wary every time I walk past that spare room door, wondering if the next time I open it, something else will have changed. I still remember the moment it happened. 1 minute I was alone in the living room, trying to clear the clutter left behind from the time my nephew used to stay with us. The next minute, I heard that eerie, off-key tune coming from a doll that was supposed to be silent. No batteries, no power. That sound made my spine tighten. It wasn't a loud sound, but it was distinct. I was completely sure it was coming from that doll. It changed something in me that day. I had woken up on a Saturday morning. I'd planned to use my free time to reorganize old boxes and sort through random items left around. Most of those items were toys. When my nephew moved out, he left behind a few things, including this doll. It was a cheap plastic figure shaped like some cartoon character. It had a small speaker in its chest and a button on its back. The on-off switch was on the back of its neck. The doll played a short children's melody whenever you pressed its belly. I remember the day it arrived in the house. My nephew had been excited to squeeze it repeatedly, so the music blasted nonstop. That melody annoyed me back then, but the quiet that followed his move felt strange too. I recall that I'd replaced the doll's batteries recently, but they'd drained almost right away. I didn't think much of it at the time. I assumed they were old or defective, so I took them out. I threw them in a separate box because I wanted to recycle them properly later. Then I forgot about it. The doll stayed in a corner of the living room for a few days. I kept telling myself I'd move it to storage, but I never got around to it. That morning, I saw it lying on the floor behind the couch, and I decided to pack it away. I bent down to pick it up. The doll felt heavier in my hand than I remembered. Its plastic surface was a bit dusty, so I brushed it off with my fingertips. I could see the battery compartment on its back was still open, just a small plastic flap hanging there. Inside there was nothing. No batteries, no anything. The switch was set to off. I didn't see any sign of damage to the wires, though a couple of them looked slightly loose or worn. I thought that might be why the batteries had drained so quickly. I placed the doll on top of a box near the TV. I had no intention of messing with it anymore. My plan was to tape the battery compartment closed and stash it. It wasn't important to me, but I didn't want to throw it away right then. I started going through some other items on the coffee table, old magazines, a remote control that no longer worked, and a few scraps of paper. The living room was quiet. I heard the hum of the fridge in the kitchen, and somewhere outside, a neighbor was mowing the lawn. I felt fine, just a bit bored by the chore of cleaning. I turned my attention back to the box near the TV. When I approached it, I heard a soft, garbled note. It was brief and cut off after half a second, so I almost didn't register it. Then I heard it again. This time it was longer. It was a distorted squeak, like something electronic struggling to function. My eyes locked onto the doll. It was definitely the source of the noise. I froze. My arms felt stiff. My heart pounded a little faster. I told myself it couldn't be the doll. It had no power, but the noise continued in short bursts, like it was trying to play that children's tune but kept losing the signal. I stepped closer, and the sound got a bit clearer. It was the same melody I remembered, but slower and out of tune. I picked up the doll. The speaker on its chest vibrated against my fingers. Each note sounded off-key, like a broken music box. My mouth went dry. A cold feeling spread across my shoulders and up my neck. I flipped the doll around, pried open the battery compartment, and looked inside. It was empty. The wires were still there, but no batteries. My hand shook a little as I held the doll. I wanted to believe it was some leftover charge, but that didn't make sense to me. The doll had been sitting there without batteries for days. It kept going, an intermittent sequence of notes that almost formed the start of the tune. Then it would stop for a second, then try again. The sound wavered like it was glitching. It gave me the creeps. I set the doll on the coffee table, took a step back, and stared at it. My breathing got quicker. I felt my chest rising and falling like I'd just sprinted. A part of me wanted to toss it straight in the trash outside. Another part of me was too curious and unsettled to let it go. I decided to watch it, half expecting it to stop, but it didn't, at least not right away. I moved around it, crouched down, and inspected the back again. The switch was in the off position. There was nothing that should be providing power. I tapped the plastic near the speaker, and the sound got louder for an instant, like a feedback loop. Then it died out again to a faint hum. The doll's eyes, which were painted on, seemed to stare without expression. I felt a tight knot in my stomach. The noise was faint but persistent. After a few more seconds, the tune got slightly more recognizable, like it finally caught the right sequence. Then it sputtered. It was an ugly, crackling sound, more mechanical than musical. I noticed my hands sweating. I tried to swallow, but my mouth was dry. My thoughts raced. I looked toward the hallway, wondering if anyone else was around. I knew my family was out running errands. I was alone. Part of me wanted someone else there just to confirm what I was hearing. Another part was glad nobody else was around. I picked it up again, pressed the belly a few times, no difference. The static notes kept coming on their own. I held the doll up near my ear. I heard a faint whirring noise. It reminded me of a tiny motor spinning without enough power. The melody slowed down until it was just random squeaks and clicks. It felt like the doll was struggling to run an internal program that had no adequate power source. This lasted maybe 30 seconds in total. It felt longer because every second hammered my nerves. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I stayed still, holding the doll against my ear for a moment. I heard nothing. No whir, no static, no crackle. It was like it had died. I pressed the belly again. Dead silence. I shook it lightly. Nothing. My shoulders relaxed a little, but my heart was still pounding. I put the doll down on the coffee table. I took a few steps back, rubbed my sweaty palms on my jeans, and tried to catch my breath. A chill lingered on my skin. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was just after noon. I kept telling myself there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe there was some residual energy in a capacitor, or the internal components had stored a small charge. I didn't know much about electronics, but I'd seen weird stuff before. Still, the feeling I had in my chest didn't go away. I decided to double-check. I looked around for any sign of a spare battery that might have gotten stuck inside, maybe a tiny watch battery or something. The compartment was empty, just 2 metal contacts. No hidden compartments. I turned the doll in my hands. The plastic was worn with a few scratches. The speaker holes on the chest were dusty. I used a tissue to wipe them. Still nothing inside that could explain it. I turned the switch to on, just to see if anything else happened. Total silence. I tapped it a couple more times. Nothing. I flipped it back to off. For a second I felt like an idiot, but I was also relieved. I set the doll aside, then took a breath and walked to the kitchen to grab a glass of water. My throat was dry from the tension. I could still hear the echo of those broken notes in my head. As I drank my water, I kept glancing toward the living room, half expecting the doll to start up again. It didn't. After a few minutes, I returned to the living room and stared at it. It was just a piece of plastic on a table. I felt a spike of adrenaline just looking at it. My muscles tensed, but it remained silent. I sighed, tossed the rest of the clutter into a box, and decided I needed a break. I left the house for a quick walk around the block. I felt the sun on my face, and it helped calm me down. My legs were a bit shaky, though. I checked my phone. Thought about texting someone, but didn't know what to say. Hey, a batteryless doll started playing music. That sounded ridiculous, but it happened, and I couldn't ignore it. When I got back home, I went straight to the doll. It was right where I left it, silent. I picked it up again and held it to my ear. Nothing. It felt cool to the touch. I set it down and decided I would tell my family when they returned. I needed to get it off my chest. Later that afternoon, my brother and mother came back. I waited until after they'd settled in to bring it up. I tried to keep my voice steady. I said, "Something weird happened with that musical doll." My brother gave me a skeptical look. "What do you mean?" I explained that it started playing by itself with no batteries. I could see the doubt in his eyes. He shrugged and said, "Maybe it had some leftover energy or a failing circuit." My mother just nodded and said, "Those toys always act strange when the batteries run low." I told them I'd remove the batteries completely. Still, they brushed it off. They didn't see how it could play any tune without power. I insisted I wasn't imagining it. I even showed them the empty compartment. My brother just rolled his eyes and said something about cheap electronics. He thought maybe some charge was stored in the doll's internal components. I argued that it couldn't have been stored for days, only to activate while the switch was off. But they didn't buy my sense of alarm. They figured it was a fluke. I know what I saw and heard. Even remembering it makes my skin crawl. There was a specific moment when that broken melody got louder, and I felt actual dread in my chest. It wasn't the kind of feeling you get from a simple short circuit. This felt different, more personal. I can't explain it well, but it felt wrong. Like something had triggered it on purpose, even if that sounds crazy. Still, I didn't want to come off as paranoid. I let them believe whatever they wanted. But I couldn't just leave that doll in my living room after that. I walked outside to the trash bin, doll in hand. Part of me wanted to throw it away. I hesitated. I guess I felt a little guilty because it wasn't exactly broken, even if it was creepy as hell. But I also didn't want it near me. I decided to keep it somewhere else, just in case. I placed it in a sealed plastic bag and put it in a large storage bin in the garage. I made sure there were no batteries in sight. I taped the battery compartment shut. Then I put the storage bin on a high shelf. I walked back into the house and slammed the door. My heart was still racing. I didn't like how nervous I felt about a plastic doll, but the experience stuck with me. I can recall the exact pitch of those malformed notes. I tried to push it out of my mind by focusing on other things. I turned on the TV, watched some random show, and tried to shake off the lingering unease. That was the last time I heard any noise from that toy. It's been silent ever since. Sometimes I wonder if I should go test it again just to see if something happens, but I don't. I don't want to go near it. It's packed away, and I'd rather keep it that way. I still can't figure out what happened that day. Maybe it was just a leftover surge in the circuit. That's what everyone else thinks. But there was something about it that felt worse than a simple glitch. It left me with an uncomfortable sensation that's hard to shake. Even now, talking about it makes me jittery. I can recall the exact way the sound rose and fell. It was like a sick version of the normal melody. I remember the way my chest tightened and my arms felt cold when I realized there were no batteries. Those seconds of hearing that broken lullaby felt like they stretched out. The doll's face didn't change, of course, but I couldn't help feeling like it was mocking me with that glitchy tune. That's the whole story. There's no big conclusion. It stopped, and I never heard it again. But I know what I experienced. Even if no one else believes me, I believe me. I sometimes think about taking it out of the garage and looking at it again, but I don't. I guess I prefer not to take any chances. If it ever starts up again on its own, I don't want to be around to hear it. I still feel a knot in my stomach when I think about that Thursday night. It wasn't the first time I had driven along that old mountain highway after dark, but it was the first time I ever felt real dread behind the wheel. I usually stick to that route on Thursday nights to dodge weekend traffic. I like to avoid crowds, and that road is usually dead quiet after 9 p.m. But on this particular night, everything felt off from the start. I left my friend's place at around 9:30. My plan was simple. Drive through the deserted highway, get home, eat something quick, then go to bed. The air was cool, and I rolled down my windows a bit to stay alert. I've always found that cold air in my face helps me focus on the road. There were a few trucks behind me for the first few miles, but they eventually took another route. After that, I barely saw any headlights. A little after 10 p.m., I spotted this faint glow coming from a roadside lamp up ahead. The light itself was weak, maybe one of those older bulbs that never got replaced properly. As I got closer, I realized there was a car parked under it, a Chevette, beige, probably from the late 70s. Its hood was up, and a man stood next to it. He was wearing a denim jacket, had long hair that spilled onto his shoulders, and he was wearing sunglasses in the dark. That last part struck me as strange right away. I slowed down because it seemed like he needed help. Maybe his engine overheated, or maybe he had a flat tire. I've helped people on that road before since service stations are spread out around here. But something about him made my arms tense up. He wasn't waving in a frantic way like people usually do when they need help on a highway. Instead, he just lifted his arm halfway, as if to catch my attention, then stayed perfectly still. He didn't shout or show any sign of distress. He just stared. It was the kind of stare that makes you feel like you did something wrong. I remember noticing that he didn't seem tired or frustrated. There was no look of worry on his face. He seemed more like he was waiting. My gut told me to keep driving. My mind started going through different possibilities. Maybe he was setting up some kind of trap, or maybe he wasn't right in the head. I've heard too many stories about robberies on empty roads. My heart was pounding faster, and I felt my pulse in my temples. I thought about stopping, but my hand stayed tight on the steering wheel. Something about his body language made me uneasy. I had already slowed down to a crawl, maybe 15 miles per hour, so I got a good look at him. He kept his eyes on me the whole time, turning his head slowly as I passed. Not once did he open his mouth to ask for a ride. I felt a chill running up my arms and down my spine. The inside of my car suddenly felt colder. In a split second, I decided to keep going. I pressed the gas and my engine roared. As I gained speed, I checked the rearview mirror. He was still there, not moving at all. I think his arm was still raised, but he was just standing, facing me. It was hard to see much detail in the dim light, but I caught a reflection off his sunglasses. That image stuck in my head for the rest of the drive. I kept glancing in the mirror until the lamppost and the Chevette faded into the distance. My nerves were shot. My hands were sweaty on the wheel. I tried to calm down by turning on the radio, but every station was just static or soft music that did nothing to ease the tension. I rolled my windows up, locked the doors, an automatic habit, I guess. My mind was racing. I asked myself if I should turn around or call for help, but I didn't see any reason to get mixed up in something potentially dangerous. When I got home, I sat in my parked car for a minute, trying to process what happened. I felt stupid for getting so rattled. People break down on that highway all the time. Maybe the guy was just weird about asking for help. But then I remembered his face, or at least what I could see of it, and how he didn't look desperate. He just looked expectant, like he already knew what I would do. For the next few days, I tried not to dwell on it. I had work, errands, and regular life stuff that kept me busy. But every now and then, an image of that Chevette would pop into my head. The memory made my stomach twist up. On Sunday evening, I realized I had to head back along the same route. My routine demanded it. I needed to visit a relative in a nearby town. So I found myself on that highway again, this time around 9 p.m. It was again pretty empty. I passed a couple of slow-moving vehicles, but nothing major. About 40 minutes into the drive, I got this tight feeling in my chest. My eyes kept darting to every roadside lamp, anticipating something I couldn't quite explain. Part of me hoped the Chevette wouldn't be there. Another part of me was weirdly curious to see if I had just imagined the whole thing. Then I saw the same weak light coming from the same old lamppost. My heart sped up. My shoulders tensed so hard that they started to ache. And there it was, the exact same car, with the exact same hood popped open. The same man stood next to it in the same clothes, denim jacket, long hair, and those sunglasses in the dark. Everything looked unchanged. My foot eased off the gas pedal and the car slowed. My palms started sweating again, and I felt my chest tighten. I can't explain it, but that moment made me break out in chills. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the guy never left. Maybe he was waiting for a tow truck for days. But that didn't make sense. Who would stand there for 3 days straight, wearing the same clothes? It didn't look like he had a phone or any baggage. He looked exactly the same. I caught myself leaning forward in my seat to get a better look. My headlights lit up a part of his face, but the sunglasses reflected the light back at me. He raised his hand slowly, just like before, and locked eyes on me. My mouth went dry. My heart thumped in my chest so hard that I could feel it in my throat. I felt a prickly sensation on my skin, like tiny needles all over my arms. This time I didn't slow down as much. I kept going, my eyes glued to him as I passed. The only sounds in my car were the hum of the engine and my heavy breathing. The radio was off. My phone was on the passenger seat, but I didn't even think about calling anyone right then. I was just focused on getting past that spot. I didn't want to stop. I didn't want to make eye contact any longer than I had to. Once I was clear of that lamppost, I stepped harder on the gas. My car rumbled as I pushed it faster than usual. I looked in the rearview mirror again. He was still there, arm partially raised, face turned in my direction. I swear it felt like I could see him watching me until I turned a curve and lost sight of him. The rest of the drive was tense. My thoughts were all over the place. I kept picturing that guy's stance, and I kept reminding myself that I needed to tell someone. As soon as I got to my destination, I called a friend who works at the highway patrol station. He listened, but he sounded pretty calm about it. He said nobody had reported any broken-down vehicle on that stretch, let alone the same car for days. He told me he would send a patrol out to check, but he also hinted that people sometimes imagine things when they're tired or anxious. That frustrated me, because I knew what I saw. I asked if I should file a formal report, and he said it wasn't necessary unless there was a threat or an accident. I tried to shake it off, but for the rest of that night, I couldn't sleep. My muscles were all knotted, and every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the man's face. My brain replayed that moment under the street lamp. There wasn't anything outright threatening in his posture, but something about him felt completely unnatural. In the morning, I told a couple of coworkers about it. One of them joked that I might have seen a ghost. Another said maybe it was a scam, but neither suggestion made me feel any better. I couldn't escape the image. It felt like I was missing something crucial. A week passed, and I avoided that highway altogether. I rearranged my schedule so I wouldn't have to drive it on Thursday night. But eventually, I had to go back. There was no way around it. My job and my personal errands sometimes require me to pass through that region. So, on another Thursday night, around 9:45, I ended up on that same lonely stretch of road. The whole drive, my eyes jumped from one post to another. I kept expecting to see the Chevette. My hands were stiff on the steering wheel. My neck felt tight and my heart raced just from the anticipation. Every mile my tension grew. But that night, I didn't see the car at all. The old street lamp was on, barely glowing, but the road under it was empty. I can't say I felt relieved. I actually felt a new kind of anxiety. Where did he go? Had I imagined everything? I drove past that spot again the following Sunday. The lamp was still there, dim as ever, but there was no sign of the Chevette or the man. I started to doubt my own memory. I considered the possibility that stress or exhaustion made me see things in a skewed way. The highway can play tricks on your mind when you're alone at night. But I knew what I had seen, twice. It was too real to be a random hallucination. Eventually, I sat down with my friend from the highway patrol again. I asked if he or his colleagues found anything. He shook his head and said they never saw a Chevette or a man matching my description. No calls came in about a stranded driver, no accidents reported, nothing. He suggested I keep an eye out and call immediately if I see the guy again. I told him I would, but inside I felt unsettled. During my next few drives on that highway, I kept expecting a third encounter. I even rehearsed what I might do differently. Maybe I'd stop and try to talk to him. Maybe I'd take photos or record a video. But the man never appeared again. Weeks went by, and that particular stretch of road stayed empty except for the occasional truck or family car. To this day, every time I pass that old lamp post, I look over. My stomach clenches, and my pulse speeds up, even though I've never seen the Chevette there again. Sometimes I think I catch a flicker of movement, but it's usually just the play of shadows. Other times I imagine I see a figure standing there, but it's just my mind expecting the worst. I've told this story to a few more people, and I get the same kind of reaction. Half skepticism, half curiosity. Some say I should have stopped that first time. Others say I was right to keep driving. Honestly, I'm glad I trusted my instincts that night. Something told me it wasn't a normal breakdown situation. I still don't have any answers, and maybe I never will. Looking back, the moment that stays with me the most is that first sight of him under the lamp. There was something off about his posture and the way he raised his hand. It wasn't a gesture of help. It felt more like an invitation or a silent demand. That memory brings back a chill in my shoulders. My body reacted before my mind could make sense of anything. I've never been someone who believes in the supernatural or in strange local legends. I like to keep things grounded. But I can't explain what I saw on that highway. I know the difference between a guy who needs help and a guy who doesn't. That man didn't appear stranded. He appeared to be waiting, calm and collected, in the darkness. He had no bags, no tools, no signs of being stuck there. He just stood next to that old Chevette as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Every time I think about this story, I notice my pulse speed up. I remember the dryness in my mouth and that prickling sensation on my arms. I remember my back muscles tightening as I glanced in the mirror. I remember the reflection from his sunglasses, even though it was nearly pitch black outside. Those details are burned into my mind. I haven't tried to come up with elaborate explanations. I've just accepted that it happened, that I saw the same man and the same car twice, in the exact same spot, in the exact same position. Nobody else reported seeing him, and no sign of a broken-down car was ever found by the authorities. Sometimes life throws you a moment that makes no sense. This was mine. Even now, when I drive that highway, I keep my eyes on the side of the road. I'm always expecting to see that Chevette again, maybe with its hood open, and that man standing there raising his hand. But he's gone, at least for now. If I ever see him again, I'm not sure what I'll do. Maybe I'll stop, maybe I won't. But I know that whenever I pass that spot, my chest gets tight. My hands grip the wheel harder, and I feel like I'm stepping into something I'm not meant to understand. And that feeling hasn't gone away. I never thought I'd stand in my grandfather's dark basement with a box cutter in one hand and a flashlight in the other, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't expect to find a hidden shelf packed with old dolls staring straight at me. Some of them missing pieces, some covered in dust so thick I couldn't see their faces right away. But that's exactly what happened, and it's what set everything else in motion. My grandfather died a few months ago, leaving his old house to the family. My aunt took care of most of the legal details, and I offered to help clear out the place. Everyone else said they were too busy, so I drove out one weekend, expecting a tedious but simple chore. The basement was my first target because it smelled like mold, and I wanted to deal with the worst part before tackling the rest of the house. When I opened the basement door, the air felt damp. It was cooler down there than I remembered. My flashlight beam hit the concrete steps, and I noticed how each one was cracked at the edges. I took my time going down because I didn't want to slip. The overhead light worked, but it was weak and flickered a little. Concrete walls, old shelves, dusty boxes, everything looked normal, at least at first. I started with the big stuff, a few pieces of broken furniture, ancient appliances that didn't work anymore, a stack of warped records. I put them in piles. Then I saw the shelf against the far wall. It was half hidden behind some boxes of books that smelled musty. I had to move 2 heavy boxes out of the way, grunting as I slid them across the floor. When I finally cleared enough space to see the shelf, I froze. A row of dolls stared back at me. Some had porcelain faces. Some looked like cheap souvenirs from past road trips. There was a ventriloquist's dummy head, the paint on its face peeling around the mouth. Another had a head made of cloth with painted eyes that had mostly flaked off. One looked like a hula dancer from a tourist shop in the 1960s, with a skirt that was shredded. Most of them were small, but that didn't change how unsettling they appeared. They were covered in dust and grime, but I could still make out their features. I felt a chill run through me because those faces looked frozen in time. I grabbed one of the dolls. It was heavier than I expected, made of some old ceramic material. The eyes seemed to track me when I moved, although I knew that was impossible. I placed it in a box with the others, figuring I'd donate them to a thrift shop later. I didn't think much more of it at the time, other than that they were creepy. After about 2 hours down there, my throat hurt from the stale air. I decided I'd done enough for one day. I packed up, switched off the basement light, and locked up the house. Then I went to stay the night at my aunt's place a few streets away. The drive over took maybe 5 minutes, but I felt this weird sense that something was off. My aunt greeted me at the door, asked how it went, and I told her about the dolls. She made a face and said my grandfather had been obsessed with odd collectibles from flea markets. She said he used to bring home the weirdest stuff and that nobody understood his fascination with it. Then we ate dinner and talked about other things. I almost forgot about the dolls. That night, I woke up in a cold sweat around 3 a.m. I'd been dreaming that I was back in the basement, except I wasn't holding a flashlight. In the dream, the light was dim and I heard something moving. I turned around and saw a tall figure near the wall, but it wasn't a normal person. It had the same face as one of those old ventriloquist heads. The body was blurry like a shadow, but the face was too clear. The mouth opened and closed, but I didn't hear words. I heard a faint scraping sound, like wood rubbing on concrete. Then I jerked awake. I sat up, breathing hard, my shirt sticking to my skin from sweat. I reached for my phone and checked the time. I felt my heart hammering. I tried to calm myself. Then I heard something, or at least I thought I did. It sounded like footsteps in the hallway, very light. I stayed still, holding my breath, straining to hear more. After 10 seconds, nothing. I told myself it was the house settling or maybe my aunt going to the bathroom. I eventually dozed off again, but it took a while. The next morning over coffee, I mentioned it to my aunt. She looked at me, kind of serious, and said Grandpa had complained about seeing strange things in the last few months of his life. He mentioned one doll in particular, though she wasn't sure which. He claimed it moved on its own. She assumed it was dementia or some other confusion. I tried to shake it off and told her it was probably just a bad dream on my part, but it stuck in my head. I kept picturing that figure from my nightmare. Later that day, I went back to the house to continue cleaning. I headed straight for the basement, determined to pack up the rest of those dolls. I wanted them gone. The place felt colder than the day before, even though the outside temperature was about the same. The overhead light flickered again, which bugged me. I set a work light on a nearby table to get better illumination. Then I approached the shelf. I opened a fresh cardboard box. I wore gloves because the dolls were covered in dust. One by one, I pulled them off the shelf. The ventriloquist head, the hula doll, a clown with cracked makeup, some generic porcelain figures. I lined them up inside the box. I realized the shelf was deeper than I'd noticed the day before. It had a back section with more dolls. The last one I grabbed had a black bow tie painted around its neck and glass eyes that caught the light in a strange way. When I lifted it, I felt my stomach clench. Its arms dangled from cheap fabric shoulders. The hair was made of some kind of brittle synthetic fiber. I put it in the box without looking at it too long. I taped the box shut and wrote dolls on the top in marker, my hand feeling shaky. Then I shoved the box aside, intending to take it upstairs. I turned to grab another box. That's when I heard a creak behind me. I spun around so fast I almost dropped the marker. The box was still there. Nothing had moved. I scolded myself for being jumpy. I put the marker in my jacket pocket and continued sorting through some books. But my nerves were shot. I kept looking over my shoulder every minute, convinced I'd see that figure from my dream or catch one of the dolls out of place. The rest of the day went on like that, tense and slow. I stayed at my aunt's place again. That night, the nightmares returned. This time I dreamed I was picking up the box of dolls, except the box was filled with water and they were floating. Their faces bobbed at the surface, eyes wide open. One of them rose out of the water and reached for me. I felt a tug on my arm in the dream and I jolted awake, heart thudding. I kicked off the blanket and realized my arm felt numb, probably from how I'd slept on it. But in that moment, it felt like I'd just escaped something. My neck was damp with sweat and my throat was dry. I got up for a glass of water, checking the hallway. My aunt's bedroom door was closed. No sound. Everything was dark. I stood there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, feeling my heartbeat calm down. After a minute, I went back to bed, but I barely slept. The next day, I told my aunt I was thinking of getting rid of the dolls. She shrugged and said it was up to me. But she also mentioned she wasn't entirely sure if Grandpa had planned to sell them or keep them for some reason. I felt torn. Part of me wanted them out of the house. Another part felt weird about throwing away something Grandpa spent years collecting, even if it was creepy and made no sense to me. I decided I'd keep them in the basement a little longer while I finished cleaning up the rest of the house. I'd donate them after I was done, once I was sure there was no reason to hold on to them. I loaded the rest of my grandfather's junk into bags and boxes over the next few days, making multiple trips to a donation center. During that time, I avoided the dolls. They stayed in their box. I kept the lid taped shut, not wanting to look at them again. The nightmares continued. Almost every night I'd see that figure from the first dream. The face was always the same, like the ventriloquist's head with chipped paint around the mouth. It would stand in the corner of my dream, motionless, until I turned to face it. Then I'd wake up, my heart racing. Sometimes I'd hear faint sounds in the hallway again, a shuffle or a step. I started keeping my phone in my hand, flashlight ready, but I never saw anything when I went to check. My aunt asked if I was okay. I said I was just stressed. She didn't push. One evening, as we finished dinner, I asked her again about Grandpa's last few months. She said he'd become convinced that one of the dolls was following him. He told her it moved positions when he wasn't looking. He thought he saw it peeking around doorways. She said it was probably hallucinations caused by medication side effects, but she admitted it made her uneasy. I felt the hairs on my arms stand on end. I tried to laugh it off, but it came out forced. That night I felt on edge until I finally fell asleep from exhaustion. On my last day at the house, I walked down to the basement with more confidence, determined to settle the situation with the dolls. I turned on the overhead light and my own flashlight, feeling better with more illumination. The box was where I left it, in the corner. I grabbed it, testing the weight. It felt heavier than before, which confused me for a second. Then I realized it was probably my imagination. I hauled it up the stairs, step by step, feeling a twinge in my lower back. My plan was to load it into the trunk of my car and drop it off at a thrift store on the way out of town. Halfway up the stairs, I heard a scratching sound. I paused, leaning the box against my knee, thinking maybe a loose step. I shifted my weight, and the scratch came again, soft but distinct. My skin prickled. I felt my chest tighten. I tried to act normal, but my breathing grew quick. I took a slow step forward, ignoring the slight tremble in my legs. I told myself it was the cardboard rubbing on something. Another scratch. I clenched my jaw and pushed forward. By the time I reached the top, I was sweating. I placed the box by the front door, locked up, and walked to the car. My hands shook as I opened the trunk. I set the box down carefully. Then I caught myself glancing at the lid, half expecting it to pop open. Of course it didn't. I closed the trunk and took a deep breath. My face felt hot, and my stomach was knotted. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and gripped the wheel. My heart was racing. I took one last look at the house in the rearview mirror. I pulled out onto the road and drove away, but I didn't go to the thrift store. I kept driving past it. Something inside me wouldn't let me pull in. I felt a weird pang of guilt, or maybe fear. The idea of leaving those dolls in a public place where some unsuspecting person might buy them made my skin crawl. I drove back to my aunt's place and parked in her driveway, sitting there for a few minutes, engine idling, wrestling with my own nerves. Then I cut the engine and went inside. I didn't mention the box to her. I just said I needed to stay another night. She didn't mind. I lay awake for hours, thinking about those dolls in my trunk. I couldn't shake the memory of those nightmares or that scratching sound. Eventually, I realized I had to make a choice. Either throw them away, or keep them locked up somewhere until I could figure out what to do. I told myself I'd handle it in the morning. That night, I had the worst nightmare yet. I was standing in the basement again, and the overhead light was flickering. I saw the figure in the corner, but this time it started moving toward me, jerkily, as if pulled by invisible strings. Its head bobbed to the side, mouth opening. My chest tightened, and I felt like I couldn't move. The figure stretched out its arms, each movement stiff and unnatural. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. My pillow was soaked. My mouth felt dry. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to my heart thud in my chest. In the morning, I went out to the trunk, opened it, and stared at the box. The tape was intact, no signs of tampering. I could see a bit of dust on the top from the road. I slammed the trunk shut and went back inside. My aunt asked me if I needed help dropping anything off. I lied and said I already donated everything. Then I said I had to head home. I drove away, leaving her house behind. As I hit the highway, I felt the tension in my shoulders. Every time I checked the rearview mirror, I thought of the dolls. I tried to focus on the road, but I kept picturing them in the box, heads bumping together with each turn. I felt a chill even though the car's heater was off. Now I'm home, and the box is in my garage. I haven't opened it again. Part of me wants to toss it in a dumpster. Another part of me can't ignore the weird guilt I feel about throwing away my grandfather's collection. Plus, there's the fear that if I toss them out, something might happen. I hate admitting that, it sounds irrational, but I can't shake it. Some nights I think I hear scuttling sounds, like small footsteps or soft taps on the concrete floor. I get up to check and never see anything, but I feel it. I feel the hairs on the back of my neck rise, and I keep picturing that face from my dreams. I still don't know what I'm going to do with them. For now, they're staying sealed in that box. I haven't had the courage to get rid of them, and I can't bring myself to open the lid and look at them again. Sometimes I stand in my garage, staring at the box, waiting to hear a scratch or a tap. So far, it's quiet. But I know tonight, I'll dream again. And I'll see that face staring at me in the dark. I'll wake up gasping, heart racing, sure I've heard those soft footsteps outside my bedroom door. And then I'll lie there, sweating, wondering what the hell I'm supposed to do. That night on the bus still makes my skin tingle whenever I remember it. I wasn't expecting anything unusual. I had worked a long shift, and all I wanted was to get home, toss my shoes aside, and crash into bed. The streets were quiet. The sky was a dull gray, and the lights from the storefronts along my route flickered in that half-asleep way cities do late at night. I walked to the bus stop, knowing it was the last bus going in my direction. The schedule taped to the post said it would arrive in a few minutes, and I could see its headlights at the far end of the road. I felt relief, because I didn't want to wait around in the cold for a taxi or walk for an hour. My head throbbed from the day's stress, and I just wanted to zone out in a seat by myself. The bus pulled up with a soft squeak of the brakes. There wasn't much noise on the street, so the hiss of the doors was especially loud. I stepped on and immediately noticed how empty it was. Only the driver was in the front, and I saw one passenger stretched out in a seat, asleep or close to it. The overhead lights gave off a weak, yellowish glow, and the interior smelled like old upholstery. The driver nodded at me. I swiped my pass, asked if this bus was still going all the way to my neighborhood, and he said yes, though in a tired voice. I nodded back and walked past the sleeping guy. He was around my age, maybe younger, wearing a hoodie with the hood halfway covering his face. I couldn't tell much else because his eyes were closed, and he had his arms crossed like he was cold. I chose a seat about 3 rows behind him, on the opposite side. I didn't want to be too close to anyone, but I also didn't want to sit all the way in the back in the dark. The bus interior sometimes feels a bit eerie when you're by yourself, especially late at night. I tried to settle in. The seat squeaked under me, and I leaned against the window to rest my head. The streetlights outside were spaced far apart, so we passed patches of dimly lit sidewalk. My eyelids felt heavy. My day at work had been exhausting. Too many phone calls, too many tasks, and I was in no mood for anything except sleep. I started to drift off, lulled by the steady hum of the engine. My neck was a little stiff, and the seat fabric felt scratchy against my jacket. I heard the occasional rustle of the sleeping guy shifting in his seat, but otherwise the bus was silent except for the engine and the wheels hitting small bumps in the road. My mind wandered, thinking about the usual nonsense. Emails I hadn't answered, errands I needed to run, the leftover food waiting at home. After a few minutes, I felt myself fade in and out of that half-sleep you get on late-night buses. Suddenly, I jerked awake. I felt a chill run through me. At first, I thought maybe the temperature inside had dropped, or maybe the AC was on too high. But it wasn't that kind of cold. My skin felt prickly, and my heart picked up speed. I tried to shake off the feeling and rub my arms. I realized I was looking out the window on my side, but the view was just the dark street. My reflection in the glass was faint because of the streetlights behind me. I decided to lean the other way toward the aisle and glanced across to the other set of windows. That's when I saw it. There was a reflection in the window across from me, and it wasn't the face of the sleeping passenger or the driver. The reflection was too old. It looked like a man with a thick beard, maybe in his 50s or 60s, staring straight at me. He was balding on top, with some hair around the sides, and his beard looked thick and unkempt. His eyes were dark, and they seemed locked onto me in an intense way. I froze. My first thought was that maybe there was someone else on the bus I hadn't noticed, but I only saw the sleeping guy when I boarded, and the driver up front, so there was no reason for a bearded older man to appear. I whipped my head around, expecting to see someone sitting across the aisle. But the seat was empty. I looked toward the back of the bus. Every seat was empty except mine and the sleeping guy's. My pulse thudded in my ears. My mouth felt dry. I blinked a few times and rubbed my eyes, wondering if I was so tired that I was seeing things. Slowly, I turned back to the window. That reflection was gone. It was just the faint outline of the seat and part of my face. My stomach felt tight. I slid forward on my seat and checked the front of the bus. The driver was looking ahead at the road, both hands on the steering wheel, focused on the route. The sleeping guy hadn't moved. He was still leaning to one side with his hood over his head, breathing slowly. I got up, not sure what I planned to do, and walked toward the driver. My legs felt shaky, and I had to grip the rails. When I reached the front, I spoke quietly so I wouldn't startle the driver. "Hey, did we stop anywhere recently?" I asked. My throat felt scratchy, and my voice came out a bit tense. The driver glanced at me through the overhead mirror. He shook his head. "No, I didn't stop. We haven't had any passengers get on or off." "Why?" I hesitated. I didn't want to sound strange. I thought I heard something, that's all," I lied. "So you haven't picked anyone else up since I got on?" He shook his head again. "No one flagged me down. The next official stop is a few blocks away." I thanked him and walked back to my seat. I passed the sleeping guy and looked at him more closely. He was definitely younger, maybe a college kid with stubble on his chin and no beard. He was out cold, mouth slightly open, no sign of the older man's features. I sat down again, trying to steady my breathing. My hands felt clammy. I glanced around, checking every row. Empty seats, empty floor space, nothing unusual. But the bus felt different now, as if something was in the air. I tried to relax and told myself it was just a tired mind playing tricks. I was probably half dreaming, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the face I saw had been real. The details had been so clear: the shape of the beard, the lines on his forehead, the intensity of his eyes. I decided not to look out the opposite window anymore, so I turned a bit and faced forward, staring at the back of the sleeping guy's seat. My heart was still pounding. After a couple of minutes, the bus turned a corner. The lights from outside flashed through the windows, and for a brief moment I saw a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye, like someone shifting in a seat behind me. I spun around, and there was nothing. Empty seats again. My chest tightened. My breath caught in my throat. I tried to tell myself it was just the flicker of headlights or the shadows of passing buildings, but my skin was crawling. I forced myself to stay calm. I checked my phone to distract myself, scrolling through messages and social media. I kept one ear open for any sound, but everything was quiet except for the engine's hum. The phone's screen felt like my only anchor. I looked at it, occasionally glancing up to see if the bus was nearing my stop. According to the schedule, I still had about 10 minutes. That felt too long. Another few blocks passed, and I felt the bus hit a speed bump. The jolt made me look toward the window again. My eyes flicked to the reflection in the glass on my side, then across the aisle. It was a habit. I was trying to see if that face would pop up again. For a second, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Then, out of nowhere, that same face appeared in the reflection on the far side. The older man with the same thick beard staring in my direction. This time, his expression looked even more intense. I swear I saw his mouth move, like he was speaking, but there was no sound. My heart pounded so hard that I felt it in my temples. I gasped and my whole body lurched forward. I twisted around, half standing, to see who was there. Nothing. The seat was empty. The aisle was empty. The sleeping guy didn't stir. I heard my heartbeat in my ears, and my breathing was shallow. The reflection was gone again the moment I looked back. I couldn't handle it anymore. My brain was racing with questions I couldn't answer. There was no one else in that bus, and yet I kept seeing this old man's face. I didn't know if I was imagining it or if something impossible was happening. But I wasn't going to sit there and wait for it to appear again. I grabbed the seat in front of me, steadying myself. My knees were unsteady and my palms were sweating. I checked where we were through the window. We were about 2 stops away from mine, maybe 3 minutes of bus travel. But I couldn't stay put any longer. I didn't feel safe, or maybe I just felt too jumpy to rationalize staying. I hit the stop request button. The little ding echoed through the silent bus. The driver slowed at the next stop. It was a lonely corner, with a busted streetlight and a closed bakery across the street. I didn't care. I just needed to get off. As soon as the bus doors opened, I moved down the aisle. I didn't even look at the sleeping guy. I kept my eyes forward, away from the windows, away from the seats. My heartbeat rattled in my chest. My breath was quick, and my skin was hot despite the chill I felt earlier. I stepped onto the sidewalk, and the doors closed behind me. The bus hissed and pulled away, leaving me alone on the dark street. I noticed there were only a few streetlights on, and the sidewalk was cracked. A stray cat darted around a corner. I inhaled a few times, trying to calm down. My arms still felt tense, and my stomach was in knots. The night air was cold, and I rubbed my hands together. I started walking. My stop would have been 2 blocks further, but I wasn't about to stand around waiting for something else to happen on that bus. I would rather walk, even if it meant going down some dimly lit streets. My phone said I had about 10 minutes on foot to get home. I kept glancing over my shoulder, nervous for no logical reason. I was alone, but I felt as though I was being watched. My chest felt heavy, and my jaw was clenched so tight that my teeth hurt. Every small sound made me jump. The rustle of plastic bags in the gutter, the distant rumble of a car turning a corner, the buzz of an old neon sign above a closed shop. My footsteps echoed against the pavement. The sky was cloudy, blocking the moon, and the streetlights were spaced far apart, leaving patches of darkness I had to walk through. My mind kept replaying that face. The details stuck with me. The thick beard, the stern expression, the piercing eyes. I couldn't figure out how it even made sense to see that reflection if no one else was on the bus. I kept moving, one step at a time, forcing my legs to carry me forward. My back felt exposed, like someone could tap me on the shoulder at any moment. But no one did. The air smelled like damp concrete and garbage left out for collection. I tried to keep my breathing steady, but it came in quick bursts. I walked faster than usual, cutting down side streets to shorten the trip. I just wanted to get inside my apartment building, lock the door, and sit down with a glass of water. Finally, I spotted the familiar shape of my building at the end of the block. The yellowish light above the entrance was on, and I could see the metal gate. My steps sped up. When I reached the front door, I fumbled with my keys. They slipped in my sweaty hands, and I had to pause, take a breath, and try again. I got the door open, hurried inside, and shut it behind me. The click of the lock felt like a relief. My shoulders relaxed a tiny bit, and I leaned against the wall for a moment. My mind was still buzzing, and my heart was still pounding. I climbed the stairs to my floor, walked down the hall, and unlocked my apartment. Once inside, I dropped my bag on the floor. My throat was dry, so I went straight to the kitchen for a glass of water. I gulped it down, feeling the cold liquid soothe my nerves a bit. My body still felt tense, and my hands were shaking. I didn't even turn on the TV. I just stood there, leaning on the kitchen counter, trying to absorb what happened. I couldn't explain it. Maybe I hallucinated because of stress and exhaustion. But it felt too real, too clear. That face is still burned into my memory. I didn't see any sign of the old man's face after that night. The bus driver never mentioned anything later, and I never brought it up to him again. But I stopped taking the last bus for a while, choosing an earlier one, or finding some other way home. I still don't have an explanation, but I know what I saw. I know how it made me feel. Every time I think about it, I feel that chill again and my stomach tightens. I'm not proud that I jumped off the bus early, but I didn't want to ride another second with that looming presence in the reflection. I can't prove it happened, and I don't really care if anyone believes me. It was real to me. It still is. That's why to this day, I avoid empty buses at night. I'd rather deal with a crowd than sit alone, watching my own reflection and waiting for something unexpected to appear behind me again. I sleep better knowing I'm not putting myself in that situation, but I'll never forget that man's face. It's the one thing I never wanted to see, and I hope I never see it again. I still remember the thunder on that first night. It rattled the windows, and I felt a jolt in my stomach every time lightning hit. I was alone on my uncle's property, tasked with feeding the horses and keeping an eye on the tool shed. I wasn't expecting much trouble. I grew up with the idea that nothing ever happened in a place like that. I figured I'd do my chores, watch some TV, and get a good night's sleep. That wasn't how things turned out. My uncle's place sits about a mile off the main road. There's a long gravel driveway that crunches under the tires. On one side, there's a field where a few horses roam. On the other side, there's a line of trees and some scrub. The tool shed is a small building near the edge of the property behind the stable. It's made of old planks and has a single light bulb dangling from the ceiling. My uncle told me to keep it locked at all times. He handed me one of those sturdy combination padlocks. He showed me how to latch it around the door handle and hook it onto the chain. He also made me promise to check it before bed every night. That first night, I did as he asked. I fed the horses right before sunset. I carried a couple of bales of hay out of the storage area and set them inside the stable. The horses were calm, swishing their tails and snorting a bit. I walked around to check their water supply. Then I grabbed the garden hose and topped it up. The sun was going down behind the distant hills, and the light had a golden color. The air felt thick because it was hot all day, and I could see storm clouds forming on the horizon. I remember glancing at the tool shed around that time. I opened the door, made sure the light was off, and locked it tight. I tested the padlock by tugging it a few times. It held. I felt good about it. Then I walked back to the house. It's a modest house with a small porch and some old rocking chairs. The front door creaked when I opened it. Inside, everything smelled a bit musty, like nobody had aired it out in a while. I set my bag in the guest bedroom, found some leftover stew in the fridge, and heated it on the stove. While I ate, I could hear the wind picking up outside. The windows rattled once or twice, but I didn't think much of it. Around 9 or 10 at night, the storm rolled in. Heavy rain pounded the roof. Lightning lit up the sky in flashes. Each flash showed the yard in bright detail for half a second. The thunder that followed shook the walls. I felt a little uneasy, mostly because it was so dark out there. I tried to distract myself by flipping through some channels on the old TV. The signal was weak. I got a fuzzy image of a local station and some static on the others. I gave up after a few minutes and decided to get ready for bed. I went to brush my teeth in the bathroom. The lights flickered. The power lines out there are old, so I figured that was normal. I finished up and headed to the guest bedroom. On my way, I glanced through the living room window just to see if the horses were okay. That's when a bright flash of lightning lit up the yard. For a split second, I could see the stable, part of the corral, and the tool shed. The tool shed's light was on. It glowed like a bare bulb shining in the night. I knew I had turned that light off. I felt a sinking feeling in my gut. I told myself maybe I left it on by mistake, but I remembered checking. I remembered the click when I turned it off. Still, I tried to think of any explanation other than someone breaking in. I grabbed a raincoat from the hallway closet. It was bright yellow, stiff from lack of use. I slipped it on, then found an old flashlight. The batteries weren't great, but it worked. Then I stepped outside. The porch lights buzzed, and a gust of wind blew raindrops in my face. I held the flashlight under my arm and pulled the hood over my head. The gravel crunched under my boots as I walked toward the shed. I kept blinking because rain hit my eyes. My flashlight flickered whenever the wind knocked it around. In the brief moments of steady light, I could see rainwater streaming down the sides of the stable. The horses were inside, so I heard only the whoosh of rain and the rumble of thunder. Another lightning flash lit up the tool shed. The bulb inside flickered. Then it went off. By the time I got to the door, the shed was dark. I reached for the handle, but I noticed the padlock wasn't on it. I aimed my flashlight at the ground and saw the padlock lying there. It wasn't broken. It wasn't open. It was just lying on the ground, next to the chain. My heart pounded against my chest. I tried the door. It wasn't locked. I pushed it open slowly, shining the light inside. The first thing I did was check the switch on the wall. It was flipped up, so the light should have been on. But the bulb was dark. There was a faint smell of wet dirt inside the shed. The roof had a few leaks, so water dripped onto the concrete floor. Tools hung on the walls, shovels, rakes, hedge trimmers. An old wheelbarrow stood in the corner. I took a step in. My shoes squeaked on the wet floor. I didn't see anything out of place. I swung the flashlight around to check the corners. The shelves were still stacked with paint cans and boxes. Nothing looked missing. I started to wonder if I'd made some silly mistake with the lock. But then I heard a sharp intake of breath. It was a heavy, raspy sound like someone trying not to cough. It came from the far corner. I froze. My mind raced. I tried to think of what to do. I cleared my throat and said, "Hello?" My voice cracked and I felt stupid, but I had to say something. The only response was water dripping from the ceiling. I moved the beam of the flashlight in that direction. It lit up a small patch of floor, a couple of wooden pallets leaning against the wall, some dusty boxes. I didn't see a person. I thought maybe an animal had wandered in, but that breath sounded human. My hands were shaking and I could feel the hair standing on the back of my neck. I backed up toward the door, keeping the flashlight on that corner. Then I heard what might have been another breath, or maybe just the wind outside. My heart was pounding so hard I felt it in my temples. I didn't see any movement. I took a couple more steps back until I was out of the shed. I slammed the door shut, grabbed the chain, and twisted it around the handle. My fingers fumbled, but I managed to hook the padlock in place again. Then I ran back to the house, slipping a bit on the wet ground. When I got inside, I locked the front door and grabbed an old chair from the dining room. I propped it under the doorknob. I felt a little dumb, but I was too rattled to think straight. I stood there for a while, listening to the storm. My mind replayed the sound I heard. It had to be someone in there. But why didn't they answer me? Why wasn't anything missing? I didn't sleep well that night. Every rumble of thunder jolted me awake. At some point I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew the sun was shining through the cracks in the curtains. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, and felt stiff all over. I got dressed and went outside. The storm had passed, and there were puddles everywhere. The horses were standing by the fence, swishing their tails. I walked over to the tool shed with the morning light shining on it. It looked normal. The padlock was still in place. I tried the door. It was locked. I opened it with the combination, stepped inside, and looked around. Nothing was missing. All the tools were in the same spots. The floor was still damp, but I didn't see any footprints or signs of a break-in. The bulb was still off, so I flicked the switch. It lit up, flickered a bit, then stayed on. I stood there scanning every corner. If someone was there, they left no sign. I shook my head, locked up again, and started my chores. By late morning, I realized I needed some help with the horse feed. I remembered my uncle said there was a caretaker next door who could lend a hand if needed. I walked down the dirt path toward the neighbor's place. It was a small cabin with an old pickup truck parked out front. The caretaker was a gray-haired man in his 60s. He had a bushy mustache and a bit of a limp. I introduced myself and asked if he knew anything about people breaking into the shed. He gave me a strange look. He raised his eyebrows, then kind of glanced at the ground. I repeated my question, but he just shook his head. He made a quick gesture like waving his hand, but not exactly. It felt like he was telling me to drop the subject. He said, "No trouble around here." Then he changed the topic and asked if I needed help with the hay bales. I tried to press him, but he dodged my questions, so I let it go. The rest of that day was calm. I cleaned out the stable, moved some supplies around, and gave the horses another round of feed. The weather stayed clear, and I felt a bit calmer. I kept thinking about what happened the night before. I wanted to chalk it up to my own nerves. Maybe the breath I heard was an echo of my own breath in that empty space. Maybe I simply messed up the lock somehow. But I knew I had locked it. I knew I had turned off that light. I decided I'd do another thorough check before going to sleep, just to be safe. That night, I made sure every door was secure. I went to the tool shed one more time, turned off the light, and tugged on the lock until I was sure it wouldn't budge. Then I fed the horses, walked back inside, and locked the house. I had dinner, just a simple sandwich, and tried the TV again. The signal was a bit better, and I found an old movie. I watched it with one ear open, listening for any strange noises outside. Eventually, I got tired and went to bed. Around midnight, I woke up to a muffled sound. It was like a scraping noise coming from outside. I lay there holding my breath. The wind was quiet, so it wasn't a tree branch rubbing against the wall. I got up, grabbed my flashlight, and crept over to the window. I didn't see anything, but I heard a faint clank. It sounded like metal. My heart started hammering in my chest again. I slipped on my boots, took a deep breath, and headed to the front door. This time, I didn't bother with a coat. It wasn't raining, and I wanted to move quietly. I opened the door a crack and peeked out. The yard looked empty. The moon was out, so I could see the stable and the fences. I didn't see any movement. Then I heard that scraping sound again. It was coming from the direction of the shed. I stepped outside, trying to keep my footsteps light on the porch. My flashlight was off. I relied on the moonlight to guide me. I walked slowly across the gravel, wincing at each crunch. The noise was louder now, a metallic rattle like someone messing with a chain. Then it stopped. I crouched behind the corner of the stable and listened. Nothing. I leaned out and looked at the shed. It was dark. The padlock was dangling from the door. It looked locked. I stood there for a good minute, my heart thumping. I didn't see any sign of a person, no footsteps, no movement. I felt a gust of cold air that made me shiver. After another minute of dead silence, I decided I wasn't brave enough to open that door again in the dark. I backed away, keeping my eyes on the shed. Then I turned and hurried back into the house. I locked the door and went straight to bed, though I didn't sleep much. Every tiny creak made me jump. In the morning, I checked the shed. The lock was secure, same as before. No signs of damage. Everything inside looked normal. I felt like I was losing my mind. Later that day, I tried to ask the caretaker about local stories or rumors. He cut me off and said he didn't want to talk about it. I asked him if there had been thefts or strange incidents. He sighed and mumbled that people see things in the dark sometimes, especially when they're alone. Then he said to keep an eye on the shed but not to worry too much. That didn't comfort me. I stayed there for a few more nights. Each night, I locked the shed and the house. I checked the horses. I tried to stay calm. A few times I heard small noises outside, but I couldn't tell if they were just animals or the wind. I never again saw the shed light on by itself, and I never found anything missing. But I couldn't shake that feeling of being watched whenever I went near that shed. My uncle returned at the end of the week. I told him I heard strange noises and saw the light on one night. He just nodded and said he'd had odd experiences out there too. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push him. Even now, when I think back on that week, I feel a knot in my stomach. I can't explain what I heard in the corner of that shed. I don't know why the light was on that night, or how the lock ended up on the ground. The caretaker acted like he knew something but wouldn't tell me. Maybe there's a vagrant who hides out there sometimes. Maybe it's just the old electrical wiring acting up. All I know is that I never felt comfortable alone on that property again. That heavy breath in the dark still keeps me awake whenever a storm rolls in, and I hear thunder rattling the windows in the middle of the night. I never thought a dark, empty lot would make my heart pound so hard. I never worried much about walking alone at night, especially on a route I knew so well. But one strange encounter changed that for me. It happened a few months ago, and I still feel that cold chill on the back of my neck when I remember it. I used to pick up my fiancée from her job almost every night. She worked the late shift at a small place a few blocks away, and I'd walk down the main avenue to meet her. It was easier and faster than driving because there was no traffic to deal with. Plus, the fresh air helped me clear my head after a long day. That walk felt safe, until one night, I noticed something lurking in the empty lot between two old buildings. I'll start from the beginning. My routine was simple. I'd leave my apartment around 10:30 p.m. because my fiancé usually got off work at 11 p.m. The avenue was straight, lined with lampposts that created little circles of light along the sidewalk. Cars passed by every now and then, but it was mostly quiet. On the right side of the avenue, there were tall buildings and shops that were closed at that hour. On the left side, there was this big stretch of vacant land. All you could see there was overgrown grass, some broken branches, and a few pieces of trash scattered around. A chain-link fence ran along part of the lot, but it was damaged in places and a couple sections were completely open. Most nights I didn't pay attention to that area. I looked straight ahead and focused on my destination. I sometimes scrolled through my phone or listened to music, but one evening I spotted a large dog standing in the shadows near the fence. I slowed down because it was unusual. This dog was big, and it had pointed ears that stood straight up. Its fur looked black under the streetlights, and I couldn't see any collar. It reminded me of a German shepherd, only a bit taller and more lean. I felt a slight tension in my shoulders. I wasn't afraid of dogs in general, but there was something off about this one. It just stood there facing me as if it was watching my every step. I tried not to stare. I pushed forward and kept my eyes on the sidewalk in front of me. My gut told me to act normal so the dog wouldn't feel threatened. I heard a low rustle in the grass, maybe from its paws moving, or maybe from a piece of trash in the wind, but I didn't turn my head. I continued walking until I reached the end of the block. Then I looked back over my shoulder just for a second. The dog was still there in the exact same spot, looking in my direction. My heart thumped, but I tried to brush it off. I met my fiancée, walked home with her, and mentioned the dog in passing. She just said maybe it was a stray. We left it at that. A couple of nights later, I was on the same path. I found myself glancing toward the lot before I even got close to it. Sure enough, the dog was there. Sitting or standing, I couldn't tell at first. Then it moved forward until it was closer to the edge of the lot near the sidewalk. The street lamp lit up its eyes in a weird way. I couldn't decide if they were yellow or red. They glowed for a moment, then blinked. My stomach twisted. It felt like this dog was waiting for me on purpose. It didn't bark or growl that night, but I sensed a kind of tension in the air. My palms got sweaty, and I found myself gripping my phone tighter. I forced my legs to move. I passed by with my head down, trying not to draw attention. My pulse beat in my ears and a drop of sweat slid down my back. I felt exposed, like at any moment this dog could rush me. Nothing happened, though. It stayed put, watching. I picked up my fiancée and told her what happened. She looked concerned, but we agreed that as long as the dog wasn't aggressive, maybe I was just spooking myself. We walked home together, staying on the side of the avenue farthest from the lot. The following week, the weather got colder. My fiancé's schedule changed a bit, so I sometimes left the apartment closer to 1 p.m. The avenue had fewer cars, and the sidewalks were pretty empty. One Friday night, the sky was clear, and the moonlight mixed with the streetlights, creating a dim glow. I left my building and started my usual route. My breath came out in visible puffs because of the cold air. As I approached the block with the vacant lot, I noticed there was nobody else around. Not a single pedestrian in sight. My footsteps felt loud against the concrete. Then I heard a low sound. It was a growl, but not a typical dog growl. It sounded deeper. My chest felt tight. I slowed down and looked to my left. The dog was there, standing in the middle of the lot, but closer to the street than before. It looked even bigger now, maybe because there was nothing else around to distract my eyes. The glow in its eyes felt more intense. It raised its head and I saw its ears twitch. That growl came again, and this time my scalp tingled. A jolt of adrenaline shot through me. My legs felt heavy. I had no idea what to do. If I ran, maybe it would chase me. If I kept walking forward, maybe it would move closer. The dog took a few steps toward the sidewalk, like it was about to cross the broken fence. My skin prickled. My mind raced. I decided to switch sides of the avenue. I tried to do it calmly. I crossed at a diagonal, glancing at the dog the whole time. It locked eyes with me and my pulse hammered. After about 10 steps, I risked a quick look over my shoulder. The street was empty. The dog was gone. No sign of movement, no sound of pause. It was just gone. My heart pounded. I spun around in a full circle, looking for it. Nothing. It was like it vanished into thin air. I felt a jolt of confusion and fear. For a second, I thought maybe I imagined it. But I knew that growl was real. The hair on my arms was still standing up. My mouth was dry. I forced myself to move on and focus on reaching my fiancé's workplace. The entire way there, I kept glancing behind me, half expecting that dog to appear from a dark corner. My hands trembled a bit. I was angry at myself for reacting like this, but I couldn't help it. I felt rattled. When I finally arrived, my fiancée noticed I was tense. She asked if I was okay, and I told her what happened. She looked worried. We both decided it might be best to avoid that lot from now on. So after that night, I changed my route. Instead of going straight down the avenue, I turned right on an earlier street and took a detour. It was a bit longer, and I had to pass by a few closed stores and a quiet park, but it felt safer. The new path was well lit, and there were usually a few people around, even if it was late. I didn't see any large black dog over there. For a while, I felt better. I hated letting fear control me, but the memory of those glowing eyes and that deep growl stuck with me. My fiance and I talked about it a few times. She suggested maybe calling animal control, but we didn't have a clear address or a house where the dog stayed. It was just a vacant lot that nobody seemed to own. I asked a neighbor if they'd ever seen a big black dog roaming around, but they said no. One guy mentioned spotting some stray dogs near the dumpsters a block away, but he never heard about one that looked like the one I described. I tried to go back to my old route once, about a week after the incident, to see if the dog was still there. It was around 9 p.m. that time, so I figured I'd just walk by and peek without getting too close. As I reached the block, my stomach tightened. I kept looking at the lot. It was mostly dark, except for a single lamppost shining near the broken fence. I couldn't see anything moving. No dog, no cat, nothing. I stood there for a moment, feeling my heart rate pick up. The silence was heavy. A car passed behind me and its headlights swept across the grass but revealed nothing. I exhaled a shaky breath and left, half relieved, half nervous. Later that night, though, when I was in bed, I replayed the dog's stare in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there. A few days after that, I had a dream about walking by the lot and seeing those eyes glow in the dark. I woke up sweating, my pulse racing. I told my fiancée about the nightmare, and she comforted me, saying it was just a stray dog, and that the vanishings and growls were in my head. But she also admitted it was creepy, so she understood my decision to keep taking the detour. A month passed. I never saw the dog again on my new route. I settled back into a routine that felt normal enough. I went to pick up my fiancée around 10:45 p.m., walked the longer way around the block, and stayed away from the vacant lot. One night I had to stop at a convenience store on the main avenue. It was right before the lot's block, and I felt uneasy about it. I tried to go in and out quickly. I bought a drink and a snack, and when I stepped outside, I looked down the street in the direction of the lot. My skin crawled when I saw a shadow moving near the fence. It looked roughly the size of a large dog, but the streetlight was flickering, so I couldn't be sure. My nerves flared up, and I walked away fast. I took a roundabout way to reach my fiancé's workplace. My chest felt tight the whole time. Even now, months later, I sometimes feel a chill when I think about that vacant lot. I don't understand how a dog that big could vanish like that. I remember the sounds, its breathing, low and steady, and that one growl that rumbled through the night air. I remember its eyes reflecting that strange color, somewhere between yellow and red. I also remember the way it stood so still, even when I walked by. Most dogs would bark or move around. This one just stared, like it was trying to figure me out. I still go out at night, but I stick to my safer path. I always check the shadows, though. If I see anything move in the dark, my pulse jumps. I try to rationalize it, telling myself it was just a stray that wandered off. But deep down, I can't shake the suspicion that there was something else at play. I don't like how it seemed to vanish into thin air that one night. Whenever I mention this to friends, they suggest I might have imagined some details because I was alone and tense. Maybe they're right, but I know what I saw. I felt that growl in my chest. I saw those glowing eyes locked on me. I remember the chill that rushed through my body. My neck hairs stood up, and my stomach twisted into knots. That was real. Fear is a physical sensation, and there's no way to fake that feeling. These days I keep to well-lit areas. My fiancé and I walk home together whenever possible. If I have to go out alone, I make sure to carry my phone in my hand, and I pay attention to every little sound. Sometimes I catch myself scanning the corners of buildings or checking under parked cars just in case. I don't know if I'll ever see that dog again, and part of me hopes I never do. I still live in the same building, and that vacant lot is still there. The grass has grown even taller, and some weeds stick out through the chain-link fence. I noticed that a few more sections of fence have collapsed, so it's easier for anyone, or anything, to slip in or out. I've passed by during the daytime a few times, and all I ever see is trash and weeds. No sign of large paw prints, no fresh tracks. That doesn't calm my nerves, though. Every time I look at that spot, I recall those eyes shining in the darkness. I'll probably never forget the night I heard that growl. I'll never forget how my breath caught in my throat or how my palms got slick with sweat. It felt like a warning. After that, I realized that sometimes it's better not to push my luck. I decided to trust my instincts, which told me to stay away. So that's what I do now. I avoid that block, especially after dusk. When someone asks me why, I just say I had a bad experience there once. That's the truth. I don't have a dramatic ending to this story. Nobody got hurt and I never had a close call. But the fear I felt was real, and it changed my habits. I don't need to see that dog again to keep respecting the danger I sensed in those moments. And I don't question my decision to walk a longer route or to keep a closer eye on my surroundings. That feeling of being watched, that growl in the dark, was enough for me. If I ever see that creature again, I hope it stays on its side of the street. And I hope it's just a dog, even though something about it still doesn't seem right. For now, I'll stick to my safe path and let that empty lot stay as empty as it wants to be. I never liked stepping into attics, but that night I felt I didn't have much choice. My cousin Anna had just inherited a small hotel in the countryside, and she asked me to help her organize everything. She was short-staffed, and the place had all kinds of hidden storage areas that needed attention. I'd already gone through most of the closets, basement rooms, and extra sheds out back. The attic was the last spot on my list. I knew it was dark up there, and the hotel's wiring wasn't great. Still, I thought I could handle it, especially with my flashlight in hand. I just wanted to get it over with. I had no idea how weird things would get. I walked up the narrow staircase that led to the attic. It was late, probably close to midnight. The floorboards creaked under my feet, and the musty smell of old wood and dust hit me right away. The single overhead bulb gave off a weak, yellow light. It flickered a few times, which made me uneasy, but I tried to brush it off. I was carrying a stack of extra sheets, and they kept slipping from my arms. I muttered under my breath and tried to keep them from falling. The attic had wooden beams running across the ceiling and a few cardboard boxes stacked against the walls. I also saw some old furniture, a broken rocking chair, a small dresser with missing drawers, and a couple of rolled-up rugs in one corner. I placed the sheets on top of a big trunk so I could reorganize everything more easily. I wanted to clear a path to the far end of the attic where a metal rack stood. It looked like a decent place to store linens. I heard a rustling sound to my left. I glanced around and saw what I thought might be a cat or maybe a large rat. I didn't spot anything specific, just movement like a quick blur. I took a step closer, shining my flashlight into the corner where I thought the noise came from, but I didn't catch anything. I told myself it was probably some stray cat that got in through a loose roof panel or a hole somewhere. This place was old, and it had a few cracks and gaps that needed patching. While I moved the trunk a little to make space, I heard a different noise. It was a shuffling sound, heavier than a cat or a rat. It reminded me of someone slowly dragging their feet across the wooden floor. My stomach flipped, and I felt a chill crawl up my arms. I tried to stay calm. I told myself that maybe one of the employees had decided to come up and help me, or maybe it was my cousin checking on me. But the steps sounded distant and strange, like they were coming from above me, even though there wasn't another floor, just the roof. I swallowed hard and felt my pulse pounding in my neck. I stood still and listened. The steps stopped. The only sound was the weak hum of the overhead light. I took a breath and walked over to the rack. I grabbed the stack of sheets and started placing them on the metal shelves. The entire time I kept looking over my shoulder. My flashlight was still on, but the beam was flickering a bit. I wondered if the batteries were dying. The overhead bulb was no help. It was too dim. As I shoved the last of the sheets onto the rack, I heard that shuffling sound again. This time it came from behind me, near the corner where the rocking chair was. I whipped around, aiming my flashlight toward that area. The chair was barely visible in the dim light. It looked like it had shifted position, but I couldn't be sure if it really moved or if my mind was playing tricks on me. Then I noticed a shape near the beams, almost like a silhouette. I couldn't make out any features, but it seemed too big to be an animal. It looked like the outline of a person crouched low. My heart started pounding even harder. I took a few slow steps in that direction, but before I got close enough to see anything, my flashlight flickered again and went out completely. The overhead bulb also dimmed for a second. I felt a drop of sweat slide down my temple, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I shook my flashlight, trying to get the battery to reconnect, but it stayed dead. I stood there in the darkness, breathing fast. My hands felt clammy, and I could hear my own heartbeat thumping in my ears. I couldn't see the silhouette anymore, but I sensed I wasn't alone. The floor gave a soft groan near the far corner, and my breath caught in my throat. I backed away step by step, bumping into boxes and nearly tripping. My eyes were trying to adjust to the darkness, but all I managed to see were vague shapes and outlines. Something moved along the wooden beam overhead. It sounded like sliding footsteps or possibly hands scraping against the old wood. The entire place felt hostile. I wasn't about to stick around and find out who or what was up there with me. I turned and bolted for the staircase, feeling my way through the dark. My shoulder slammed into a wooden support beam, and the pain shot through my arm. I clenched my teeth and kept moving. I nearly tumbled down the steps in my rush, but I managed to keep my balance. Once I got to the hallway below, I flicked the light switch at the bottom of the stairs. Nothing happened. The bulb there was dead, or maybe the power was fluctuating again. Without pausing, I rushed down the hall past a couple of guest rooms and straight to the lobby where Anna was flipping through some receipts. She looked up at me, startled. I must have looked pale because she immediately asked if I was okay. I told her I just got spooked in the attic, maybe by a cat. I didn't want to sound like a lunatic. Anna said she'd check the attic in the morning, and I nodded. I felt restless that night. Every time I tried to relax, I heard those dragging footsteps in my mind. I imagined the shape in the corner, crouched and watching me. I kept telling myself it was just some stray animal. Still, my gut told me otherwise. Something about that presence felt human. The next day I woke up early, even though I hadn't slept much. I walked to the attic stairs. Anna was busy with the front desk, so she couldn't join me, but she told me to take a quick look. I brought a new set of batteries for my flashlight and turned it on to test. The beam was strong this time. I climbed the steps slowly, trying not to stir any dust. I was bracing myself for the worst, but the attic looked quiet. I walked around, checking each corner. The overhead bulb still flickered. The furniture was in the same place, and there were no signs of movement. Nothing looked disturbed at first glance. The rocking chair was still facing the wall. The stack of sheets was exactly where I'd left it on the rack. But then I noticed something on the floor. There were footprints in the dust. They were clear enough to see that they belonged to someone with bare feet. The prints led around the perimeter of the attic and disappeared near the far wall. My chest tightened, and my mouth went dry. I thought about the staff. Anna had 2 part-time housekeepers plus a cook who mainly stayed in the kitchen. None of them had any reason to be in the attic. And even if they did, why would they walk around barefoot? I squatted down to look at the footprints more closely. They looked fresh, and they were definitely from an adult. I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. I considered the possibility of someone squatting in the attic, maybe a vagrant who found a way in. But how would they get past the locked doors and the staff? I followed the prints until they vanished near the stack of boxes by the wall. I tried moving the boxes to see if there was a hidden panel or a doorway. The floor there creaked, but seemed solid. I didn't see any trapdoor or opening. I even checked for small cracks or holes, but all I found were spider webs and old nails sticking out of the boards. After that, I hurried downstairs and told Anna what I saw. She looked confused and concerned. She told me that nobody else had a key to the attic except us. The employees wouldn't go up there without asking her first. She suggested maybe the footprints were old, but the dust was disturbed in a clear path. It didn't seem likely they were from days ago. She asked me to show her, so we went up together. When we reached the attic, we walked to where the footprints started. She examined them in silence. She was careful, taking slow steps around them to get a better look. She didn't have a quick answer either. We decided to keep the attic locked from now on, at least until we could figure out how those footprints got there. Anna also mentioned that maybe we should set up a camera or something, but the place didn't have a modern security system. We only had a few cheap motion sensor lights outside the building to scare off animals at night. That evening, I double-checked the attic door. I locked it and pocketed the key. I was still supposed to stay in the hotel for a few more days to finish helping with the organization. I moved on to other tasks, trying to keep my mind off the attic. I sorted through old paperwork in the office, labeled some storage boxes, and arranged the basement pantry. But in the back of my mind, I kept picturing those bare footprints in the dust. Later that night, I heard noises from upstairs. It was around 10 o'clock, and I was in the lounge area. There were only 2 guests in the hotel that night, both older couples who seemed quite pleasant. Anna had gone to bed early because she had an early meeting the next day. The noise from the ceiling was faint, but it reminded me of that same dragging sound I heard before. I looked at the ceiling and my heart pounded. The locked attic door was in a hallway near the second-floor landing. Nobody should be up there. I decided to check it out. I walked upstairs with my flashlight ready. The hallway lights were on and I could see the attic door clearly. It was still closed, but I needed to be sure. When I reached it, I turned the knob. It was locked. I tried pushing it, and it didn't budge. I exhaled in relief, figuring maybe I was imagining things. Then I heard a light scraping sound from behind the door. My hand jerked away from the knob. I stood there for a few seconds, holding my breath. The scraping stopped. I reached into my pocket for the key, but I froze, unsure if I actually wanted to go in there alone. The memory of the previous night raced through my mind. My palms felt slick with sweat. After a minute, I made up my mind. I unlocked the door and pushed it open just enough to shine my flashlight inside. All I saw at first was the bottom step leading up to the attic. The light revealed nothing unusual. I felt a wave of relief, but I also knew I had to be certain nobody was inside. I climbed the steps slowly, keeping the flashlight aimed ahead. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. Each step made a dull thump against the wood. When I reached the top, I flipped the overhead switch. The bulb flickered on, dim as usual. The attic was quiet and looked exactly like I'd left it. No new footprints, no boxes out of place. Just the same dusty floor. I walked around carefully, checking behind the trunk, behind the old dresser, under the rack of sheets. Nothing. I closed the attic door again, locked it, and went to my room. I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling. I couldn't stop thinking about the noise and the footprints. It didn't feel like a regular break-in. There was something unnerving about how quiet it was up there, and how the footprints led nowhere. Eventually, I dozed off, but my sleep was uneasy. The next morning, Anna asked if I'd checked the attic. I told her I had, but didn't see anything. She looked tired, and I guessed she was stressed about the hotel's finances and the sudden weirdness upstairs. She suggested we call someone to do a thorough inspection, maybe a handyman or a general contractor, to see if there were any hidden entrances or structural issues. I thought that was a good idea, but I also wondered if it would explain the footsteps I'd heard. While we waited for a handyman to come by, we carried on with our daily tasks. I helped with guest check-ins and did some cleaning. In the afternoon, I decided to revisit the attic one more time, just to see if anything changed. I unlocked the door and climbed up. The footprints were still there, but now they seemed faded, like someone had brushed some of the dust around. I couldn't tell if it was just me tracking dust, or if something else moved up there during the night. I spent about an hour going through every box, every piece of old furniture. I shined my flashlight in every corner and along each beam. I looked for cracks in the roof or gaps where someone or something could hide. I didn't find a thing. The only out-of-place detail I noticed was a slight draft near the far wall, as if air was coming from somewhere. I checked the outside of the building afterward, but I couldn't spot any hole or vent big enough for a person to climb through. We never found a definitive explanation for those footprints or the noises. The handyman arrived a few days later, poked around, and said the building had some minor insulation issues, but nothing that would allow a person to sneak in unnoticed. He sealed a couple of cracks and recommended we update the wiring in the attic to fix the flickering lights. Anna followed his advice, and we didn't hear any strange sounds for a while. But even after everything seemed normal, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone up there. Sometimes at night I swore I heard a faint dragging noise above my room. It never lasted long enough for me to grab my flashlight and catch it. Anna said she heard it too, once or twice, but she tried to ignore it. We both decided to keep the attic door locked at all times and only go up there when it was absolutely necessary. I stayed at the hotel for another week, helping Anna finish up the organization. Then I headed home. On my last night there, I walked past the attic staircase on my way to bed. I paused and looked at the door. Something in my gut told me to stay away. I remembered that shape I saw in the corner, how it seemed to watch me, how the footprints appeared the next day. A cold chill went through me. I never got a solid answer about what happened in that attic. I don't know if it was a person hiding out or just my imagination combined with some weird sounds and old footprints. But the memory of that night, especially the moment when my flashlight died and I heard those heavy steps above me, still makes my skin crawl. If I ever go back to help Anna again, I'm staying as far away from the attic as possible. Locked door or not, I don't want to be anywhere near that darkness.